Morning, everybody.
Good morning, Kate.
That's right. Respond excitedly. Everybody is here. Okay, so welcome everyone to our first meeting of 2019. Let's hope 2019 is starting off well for everybody. So we'll start by with Tamika and work our way across with intros, and then we can establish a quorum. So go ahead, Tamika, you can start.
Good morning, I'm Tamika Butler. I am a speaker's appointee.
Good morning, Joseph Holt, Institutional Representative.
Margaret Ryder, Consumer Representative.
My name is Kate Carey. I am an institutional representative, and I am chair of the committee, and Margaret is my co-chair.
Michael Marian.
Sorry, I like co. We'll just go.
Michael Marian, Bureau Chief.
Chief Monkey Bug. That's me.
Mina Hamilton, counsel for the Bureau.
Megumi Tsutsui, consumer advocate.
Diana Maya, public member.
David Vice, institutional member.
Thanks, everyone. So, I didn't even see you over there.
Christy Shield, counsel for the Office of Student Assistance and Relief.
All right. So, Lisa. She needs no introduction.
Louisa Rofretti, deputy bureau chief.
Morning, everybody. So we have enough people to establish a quorum. And with that, we can move on to business. The first thing on the agenda is public comment on items not on the agenda. So if anyone has anything that they want to talk about before we get started that is not already on the agenda, going once, going twice. All right. Moving on. The next item is review and approval of the November advisory committee meeting minutes. Does anybody have any comments, corrections, thoughts, concerns? Anyone? No?
Can you stop baiting people, please?
Well,
This is, I get anxiety about that piece.
Bueller. Okay, great. If there are no requests for corrections or anything on the meeting minutes, then can someone make a motion to accept them?
Move to accept the minutes as written.
Second.
Thank you. We can do a roll vote. Tamika, can you start with a yay or nay?
I was going to abstain because I don't believe I was here.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, maternity leave.
Yes.
Yes.
Approved.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll abstain since I wasn't here.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think that ratifies the minutes. All right, moving on to number 4, remarks by representative of the DCA. Morning, Dean.
Good morning, Chair Lee Carey, Vice Chair Ryder, advisory committee members. Good morning. Thank you again for allowing me to speak on behalf of the department and provide a department update as of obviously February 19. Can't believe January is already behind us, but who am I to say time is going slow or fast? First, talk about some highlights from 2018. I'd like to mention that in this past year, we convened 9 licensing and enforcement workgroup meetings, 3 substance abuse coordination committee meetings, 4 directors quarterly meetings, pro rata workgroup meetings, and 2 director board member and advisory committee leadership teleconferences. These activities not only brought us together to promote open dialogue among the department's board and bureaus, but also promoted collaboration to further our mission in protecting California's consumers. I've said the following to other programs that have provided a DCA department update. When I first got the job now 2 years ago, this coming March, naturally my family was interested in here my days were going. At about the 6-month mark, my 2 kids quickly recognized that I'd go to a lot of meetings. And so they'd say, "Hey, Dad, attend some meetings today. In all seriousness, it's so very important that, yes, there's a purpose to these meetings. I think I've shared with this body before that I'm interested in trying to make sure we are intentional of trying to strip away the silos that unfortunately inevitably exist in bureaucracies. DCA is not unique in that regard. Nonetheless, whether it's via meetings, whether it's other forms in which we are, again, trying to be intentional towards breaking the silos, I will be there first and foremost in trying to do that. And I appreciate your folks' effort in attending many of these meetings. I promise you there will be more to come. But again, I promise you there is going to be intention with what we do in those meetings. Specific to the DCA annual report, I invite you to review the DCA 2018 annual report for a much more comprehensive review of the department's achievements. The report contains statistical and financial record of the work that the department and its boards and bureaus have achieved over last year. When you have a moment, you'll be happy to know that you can review this online on our website. Specific to the administration's transition and Governor Newsom's budget. As you all know, Monday, January 7th marked a new era for our state as Governor Newsom was sworn in as the 40th governor of California. We at DCA are honored and excited to be part of this team. The department has met with the transition team and many new and some familiar faces that have been appointed to positions within the governor's office. Our department is looking forward to doing all that we can toward furthering the governor's mission. On that note, specific to his budget, on January 10th, Governor Newsom released his budget outlining his fiscal priorities for this great state. Based on the driving idea of California for all, the governor's budget proposes to pay down debts and pension obligations, continues to build up robust budget reserves, while making significant investments in housing, childcare, healthcare, prescription drugs, preschool, and higher education. No small task on any of those. Immediately following the budget release, the department hosted a teleconference with board leadership, executive officers, and bureau chiefs to discuss the governor's 1920 proposed budget and to review proposals within the budget specific to the department. I know understanding how the governor's budget translates to your individual budget is a top priority, so I want to reiterate, as I mentioned on the call, that our fiscal operations will schedule individual program meetings to discuss individual budgets in greater detail. It's my understanding that the Bureau had their meeting on January 25th with our budget unit. Specific to directors' quarterly meetings. This upcoming February 25th, I will host the first 2019 directors' quarterly meeting. At this meeting, DCA will provide an update on the department's regulations unit, the executive officer salary study, and several division updates. As you may recall, these quarterly meetings are an opportunity to ensure that I'm available to hear important issues facing our boards and bureaus. Again, in the spirit of trying to make sure we're intentional about stripping away the unfortunate, inevitable silos that exist in bureaucracies. Related to mandatory sexual harassment and prevention training. This year is a mandatory sexual harassment prevention training year for the department. This means all employees and board members and advisory committee members are required to complete this training this year, even if it was completed last year. This training is online, interactive, and can be completed at your convenience. If you have any questions about this or any other required trainings during your tenure as a committee member, please contact our Office of Board and Bureau Services. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention you know her very, very well. She's in the audience. Kevin DeHorace Nelson is your contact with DCA's Board and Bureau Services. On a topic very specific to this bureau, the Enforcement Task Force. In November of 2018, the department convened BPPE, DCA executive staff, and the Division of Investigation to put into place an action plan to reduce and ultimately eliminate the complaint backlog. This meeting resulted in the creation of a BPPE enforcement task force led by staff from our Division of Investigation with the goal of significantly addressing BPE's enforcement activities. The department has provided the following resources to the task force. First, 1 commander from the Division of Investigation. Second, 3 retired annuitants from the Division of Investigation. 3, 1 part-time supervising investigator from Division of Investigation. 4, additional support from the Office of Human Resources on BPPE's restructuring. 5th, office space at DCA headquarters for BPPE employees. The task force will initially focus on reducing and eliminating all backlog complaints 365 days and older, reducing and right-sizing analyst caseloads, and recommending process improvements. The team will be in place through June 2019. We plan on reporting in more detail at the next advisory committee meeting. And let me also mention that June 2019 date is not etched in stone. It's more of a benchmark. Naturally, we'll assess appropriately, and if different resources, more resources, or otherwise are needed, be rest assured I'm interested in, again, extending that date to January 2019, if in fact necessary. This concludes the department update, and as always, if the department can be of service to the Bureau, please let us know. Thank you very much again for allowing me to address the department, to address the committee on behalf of the department. More than happy to answer any questions you folks may have.
I have one question. You said that's to, the task force is to try to help eliminate the complaint backlog. Is it also looking at the backlog of institutional inspections?
So the emphasis is in fact specific to enforcement backlog. Your reference was to institution, what was the term again?
Inspections there's a certain number of inspections that are required, both announced and unannounced, by statute.
So real quick, my understanding is the front burner priority for this task force is on enforcement. Simultaneously, I would suspect, and Dr. Marian could probably confirm, that outside of this task force goal, the inspections are being addressed in a different manner. Dr. Marian?
So yes, and yes. Our inspection actually falls within the enforcement unit. So absolutely. Yep. I go ahead.
I had a question about, you mentioned the role of commander in the task force. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What is their role and scope of responsibilities?
Yeah, as you can imagine, D of I's work in enforcement goes department-wide. Mm-hmm. They're well-versed in terms of its enforcement activities. The role of the commander, specific to this bureau, is literally to be kind of the person in charge while that task force is at BPPE. Again, I'll defer to Dr. Marian if you'd like to add on to the question.
Absolutely. So this is actually part of my report.
Oh,
so
we can defer the question. Okay. We can defer the question. It's fine then. Yeah.
Cool.
Just for clarification, in case everybody doesn't know, B of I you're speaking of as the Bureau of Investigation, the State Bureau of Investigation?
So that is the department's Division of Investigation.
Division of Investigation.
Yes, affectionately known as the guns and badges for the department.
And
So just to be clear.
And the 3 retired annuitants and one-time part-time supervisor are all from that department? Or
So
are there
I could, don't know specifically whether or not they've had a past history at Division of Investigation. With Dr. Marian's head shaking, I'm led to believe that is in fact the case. And potentially, those retired annuitants, they may have had a history even outside of D of I, but in enforcement space, maybe specific to the department or beyond. As you may know, Vice Chair, many of the investigatory roles and responsibilities of the department is replicated, exists in other departments as well. My point is as I'm learning, being on the job, that it's often beneficial for the department to kind of cross-pollinate with what other departments in the state are doing. And so while we may, initially, be missing folks that literally go to other departments, I think also we benefit from folks coming to the department. Be more than happy to get the specific background of the folks, of the retired annuitants, if that in fact interests you.
And, I'm sorry. Just to clarify, has the task force stood up already, or does it have a specific stand-up date it has stood up?
Yep.
Great. Okay.
Yep. Been active since November. Yeah.
Are the outcomes of the task force going to be reported separately, or are they sort of going to be rolled into the reporting that happens with the enforcement division?
So we can do both. I think that portion of it will definitely be rolled into it.
And just to reiterate, the goal is definitely to kind of report back by the next advisory committee member, a meeting of literally kind of the status.
So I just want to publicly thank you, Dean. I've been here just over a little bit over a year now, and you've been a great supporter of me in this role in the Bureau. And I think this is just shows you the support and the level of energy that we're getting from DCA, that this is a big issue. And when we had this conversation, Dean and his team stepped up to support us, and I just want to publicly thank you.
Appreciate that, Dr. Marian. Happy to, and looking forward to continuing our collaborative efforts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right, so next up, item number 5, Bureau Operations Update. Is that you?
Public comment.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. If you guys weren't here, this meeting would take 5 minutes. Public comment on the DCA presentation? No? Okay. Thank you. Moving on, agenda item number 5. Bureau Operations Update. Is that you, Dr. Marian?
That would be me. So first of all, I would like to thank Tamika for her service to the advisory committee. I don't know if you know, but this will be her last meeting.
Aw, boo.
So thank you and congratulations. She has a little one now, so congratulations on that as well. So
Amazing.
thank you for your service and congratulations to the new addition to the family.
Thank you so much. This has been a true pleasure, and I think I've really learned a lot from everybody. A lot of different faces, but a lot of consistent faces. So in particular, Margaret and Kate, just thanks for your leadership, and I'm really going to miss you guys.
Yeah, same here. Congratulations, though. It's awesome.
Outstanding. So to follow up just real quick on my update and report for number 5, A and B, they will be bleeding over into each other. Leading into the Bureau operations and update and discussions related to the Bureau, I first wanted to welcome a new addition that we have to the team, Fresha Rosali, who is the executive assistant for Lisa and I, and if she stands up and waves to everybody. So she will be a major contact, our major contact for the office. And Fresha is an attorney. She just graduated from law school and will hopefully be one of our attorneys. She did clearly say she wants to take Mina and Christy's job in the future. So I just want to put that out there. She's starting in the right place. So thank you so much. So given an update on regards to things that are going on with the Bureau. So in your package, you have on page 27 and 28, a org restructure update, a org chart that will show you the restructure of the Bureau. So as Dean was alluding to, and as I've been talking about, over the last 2 months, the Bureau has been going through a huge restructure and reorg. And in that reorg, we were very intentional in regards to the vision for the future of the Bureau. And so in that, I want to just give everybody, we have kind of 3 phases that we've gone through starting in late November, early December, and just kind of give you an update to everybody on where we are in that process. It's a lot been going on since our last meeting. So starting with annual reports unit. So the annual reports unit will now be reporting to Robert Bales. Actually, that's where Robert started with the Bureau when he first came on 100 years ago. Teasing. I'm playing. He actually started in that space. And so we will be adjusting that unit from under Beth's supervision over to Robert Bales. And then all we will be moving, the next one is discipline and citations unit. That will be moving from Yvette's unit over to Beth. Beth has background and history in this area, so she will be the one over that new unit. And then the unlicensed activities, which is now reporting to enforcement, and it's a new unit that was created here in November. And I have to give kudos to Lisa Ferretti, our deputy bureau chief, this was her brainchild. And just an update on that, with that unit alone, we've been able to clear almost 125? Something like that, 125 to 150 unlicensed activities that was in our enforcement. So that alone is huge in regards to the work that we've been able to do. And we were able to borrow some staff out of licensing to help us with that. And I just want to give kudos to that team to help us knock out some of those unlicensed activities. Additionally, with some of those changes, the annual reports unit and the quality of education unit has been moved over to DCA, actually in this building, to create more space for the task force that was mentioned by the director in regards to being able to have more room to bring in some team to do some of this work. And so I just want to make sure that folks know that. And that was kind of the phase one of the reorg process. Phase two, as Dean talked about, was the conversation that we've had with DCA and Division of Investigations with David Chris and DFI, who's the captain over that unit, and having some real honest and transparent conversations about where we want to be and where we want to go as a bureau. And so just to give a little bit of background, we have Laura Guardhouse and Stephanie Whitley, who are captains within DFI that are helping us with the restructuring and reorging of our enforcement unit. I will give more of that information at our next meeting, but I just want to name them because they've been great thus far in helping us look at some of the policies and procedures, but also the structure in which we're looking at things. That being said, also with Yvette, we have Yvette transition over to the admin unit. She's going to be over the head of admin, but also she's going to be in charge of special projects. Obviously, one of the biggest ones that we have coming up is going to be our 2020 sunset. So she's going to be taking main control of that and making sure that we are in a right state of mind to be able to pass our sunset review. So I want to make sure to put that in the room. Some of the things that have been talked about were with the task force, as Dean talked about, was age cases. So cases over 365 days old. So those are some of the things the task force is going to be look like. Also the caseload that is on the manager's desk and trying to figure out how we kind of restructure and go through those. Another thing that we'll be looking at is some fraud cases. And then also looking at process timeline. And this is a big thing for the Bureau. I don't know. I think I might have mentioned this previously. Historically, when a complaint or something comes into the Bureau, it's automatically charted as a backlog. And if you look at the other bureaus and board services within DCA, that's not how the process works. They have a processing timeline. So whether that's 120 days, 180 days, the Bureau, for whatever reason, historically hasn't had that. And this is one of the things the task force is going to be helping us look at, what the proper timeline for processing complaints within the Bureau. So I think that's something I also want to do. And then one of the big pieces is, once again, is policy and procedures. You know, that's one of the things that we're going to have to spend a lot of time just making sure that everything is in line with where we want to go for the future. And I'll report more on that as we get more information, and specifically at our next meeting. And so phase three of this is more so talking to, and once again, it's kind of in line with the strategic plan and being the lead agency. So some of those things that we talked about, I think, are going to help position us. Our strategic plan is going to be ending in 2020. And so we've already met with Solid, who's going to help us sit down and kind of prep this summer, starting this summer in regards. And so they shall be in contact with some of you guys and some of the committee members in regards to helping us plan for the future of the Bureau. And I think we're going to be sitting nice. So looking at some of the strategic items that the Bureau was hoping to make progress on from the 2016 to 2020 plan, we've definitely made a lot of progress in some of those. And then as we get closer to starting with our new strategic plan, I'll definitely update folks on that. And that concludes my report. That was a lot. Questions, comments, concerns?
A question I'd raised for reporting and discussion in the last couple of meetings was a discussion about what it is the Bureau can do, what hasn't happened with the Bureau, so that it is the agency that is really finding and addressing the problems before they mushroom into giant lawsuits. is that something that was going to be in this part of your report, or is that somewhere else here?
No, that was part of that report. That's why I said the two are going to blend.
Oh, okay, so you haven't done that part yet.
No, I did. That was part of the conversation.
That was it?
Yep, that was it.
Okay.
But you said discussion, so we can have a discussion.
Okay, great. So let me start out then. I'd like to hear from staff why it is that in the past few years, the Bureau hasn't been the agency that has gotten to the problems before they have become litigation, prosecution, major school closures. What is it that has prevented that from happening, and how will the things that are being changed address that, and what additional needs to be done?
So I think that's a great question, Margaret. I think, in all honesty, in my humble opinion, I think the Bureau started off on the wrong foot. And I don't want to blame the Bureau for that, because when you come back into existence and you have 800 plus backlog, all you're doing is just fighting to stay afloat. And so some of the things that you've heard me talk about in regards to this restructuring of enforcement, some of the things that's going on in the task force, are all meant to be able to prepare us to hopefully be that lead agency. And I'm taking and have been taking a serious look at that. And that's, I think, why I thought it was important for the director to come today and talk to the support, because I've been making it clear that in order for us to be able to move at the pace and the level that we need to do to be more efficient and effective, some changes have to be made. And I've been very clear with that. And then you can see that, and that's occurring in my short time being here.
I guess I'd like, if there's, should your staff members who are here feel free to add in what they'd like to add without any issues, or is that all right?
I'm pretty sure they'll probably give an update during their reports
All right.
of what's going on. But yeah, I would say that's probably it.
All right, and I guess I'm looking for, I suppose, a little more detail. Maybe just by taking an example. Let's take even the most recent one. What is it, Brightwood? What did the Bureau do about it? What did it know about it? Was it caught by surprise? Had there been signs? Had there been inspections? Were there citations issued? Were there disciplinary actions recommended? How far back does this history go? As an example, or choose another one if you want. What is it that the Bureau is doing now that would try to catch this thing before it gets to that point? Are there legislative changes needed? For example, more frequent audits, that kind of thing.
Right. So I think some of this information as far as Brightwood may come out in the OSAR report, but just hopefully I don't steal any of Scott's thunder. I can say that we found out 48 hours before they closed that they were going to close. And I'm extremely proud of our OSAR team that we were able to get out to all 11 campuses, do presentations, be able to get information to the students, the information they need to be able to not only contact us, but what options may occur. And so not only did we did that, we went to the BRN board meeting, presented there. We went to the BVNT board meeting and from there. And it was one of those situations where we were heavily involved, but we found out 48 hours before. So we did the best that we could do. And I'm very proud of what we did in that short amount of time.
I'm really looking at before it got to that point. Were there signals? Were there signs missed? Were there things that we should have known about? Why didn't we know? Those kind of things.
I just wanted to just caution that those questions and that topic isn't on the agenda. There's a Brightwood closure reference later on in the OSAR report, but I think your comments are taken, but I would caution against any more discussion about particularly Brightwood and how the closure happened and what the Bureau knows about that for a future agenda.
I don't care if it's anonymous without identifying the school, but I'm not hearing that, so I was giving an example. But, take any of the schools that have closed in the last 2 or 3 years. Why didn't we know about it sooner? Did we take disciplinary steps against any of these schools? what were they, et cetera. You know,
Great question. I don't have that information, but what I can tell you is based on the report that I did give, you can see that there's change going on at the Bureau. And we are taking this serious, and I'm taking this serious, and you will continue to see change as we move forward. And I can promise you in my time, we're going to do nothing but get better.
I feel like I've got to respond. Hypothetically, let's just say there was a school that recently closed. There wasn't a lot I think the Bureau could have done. I don't think they had violations. I wouldn't know, but the big issues were the accrediting body pulled their accreditation, the Department of Ed, the Fed Education Department put them on a status that, starved them of cash and wasn't going to allow them to make payroll in a week. So that's how it happens that quick. If the Bureau was in the loop, even 48 hours in advance, because it all happened very, very, very fast. So you've got, institutions that are not meeting their accrediting bodies standards. It doesn't mean they're not making the Bureau's standards. And every accreditor has different standards. I think, going back from the minutes from the last meeting, there was some discussion that every accreditor has different standards. Some, aren't very big on student outcomes, but the performance fact sheets, list them. So I'm not sure if there was anything, and there's only so much the Bureau can do when it's outside of their privy as far as what can happen.
If I may, Dr. Marian. I've been with the department for about 19 years, and I've worked with a lot of clients at this department. And what I think is true with respect to being the lead on any enforcement matter, it's complaint and tip driven from either referrals from other state agencies or outside parties, or if they happen upon investigation to see something come up, then there is cause to investigate and perhaps do something in advance of an issue occurring. But it's true of every agency in this department. If we don't have advance notice of an issue and it's not serious, meaning if it doesn't rise to the level of a disciplinary action, then typically there wouldn't be any kind of advance notice to an agency of an issue. So I don't have the particular details of any particular case, but just for your information, generally, that's how most of the agencies work in this department. A lot of the investigations are complaint driven, and they have to meet a standard and burden of proof in order to take any kind of enforcement action, and it's not a low level of burden of proof. So regarding, how to become the lead agency, I think that you can do only so much if you don't get information that there's an issue and it rises to the level of the agency being able to have jurisdiction to do something with it. It's hard to become a lead on a particular closure or anything like that.
It's my understanding that the accrediting agencies do provide their information to the Bureau, for example, if they do an order to show cause or something like that, correct? Or regarding when there is a renewal. As my understanding also is the accrediting agency wouldn't pull accreditation without first having gone through a fairly lengthy process. And so presumably the Bureau was aware of that. And I guess the question is, again, hypothetically, when it gets information from the accrediting agency that there is some kind of a less than pristine status, are there steps being taken to see, well, is that also something that might violate our law? The feds don't pull funding unless there's some kind of a financial issue. Do we get notice from the feds about schools that are, close to that status? And again, I guess the other question is, are these schools that were inspected within the last, 2-3 years, were there unannounced inspections? Because in my experience as a prosecutor, I think it's correct. You learn about these things when there are complaints, when there are things from other agencies and stuff. But it's also my experience that for the most part, they don't happen in the blink of an eye. There are signs. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that we're missing that we should be figuring out in advance? Those are the kind of questions I have.
I have a quick comment in regards to The superstructure is a regulatory triad in which the federal higher education regulation, you have the accreditor and the accrediting bodies, and then the state authorization and state approval agencies. And I think it would be inappropriate philosophically to have any one of those be, quote, the lead agency, because by design, it's a regulatory triad. And so I think I agree, Margaret, that usually where there's smoke, there's fire. If there's one issue, there may be more. But in terms of the scope of a solution from the Bureau and from your staff's approach, Dr. Marian, it would be to make sure that you are fulfilling your mandate effectively. And I think the larger concern maybe is there's question marks about that, right? So we want to make sure that within the scope of your duties and responsibilities, you're doing that effectively, efficiently, quickly. And then that probably would solve, I think, Margaret, your larger concern. But I would caution broadly against getting outside of the lane, right? And understanding that there is a regulatory triad and each necessarily fulfills a different role.
And this probably hit, what, 15 states, 20 states? I mean, that's how many states the Brightwood had, or this hypothetical institution had. And it could have been handled differently if one of the people in the triad would have just allowed for a teach out and not slam the door on funding and let students do it. I think that was the intent all along. So
And one
you
more
gotta
thing.
have cooperation.
Sorry, Dave. On top of that, and I understand, your concern, Margaret, but I think another thing to think about is what, in your mind, what is the, do you think there would have been a different outcome had the Bureau somehow identified an issue earlier? So let's say there was some smoke, and so the Bureau was the first to notice it, and the Bureau issues a citation or whatever it would do. If in fact the issue ultimately ended up being a funding issue, how do you see the outcome being different other than the Bureau having issued a citation or something earlier in the process? Like what is it that you see as the end game that the Bureau's role would have done to change the outcome?
If in any of these, and I appreciate there are other folks out there that are not necessarily fulfilling their mandate, and but if the Bureau had acted sooner, let's say that why is it that the accreditor figured out that there were problems before the Bureau did? Maybe they were things that related to nothing under the Bureau's jurisdiction, but maybe they did. Why was it the accreditor figured that out before the Bureau? And once the accreditor figured out there were issues and started some kind of a process, if the Bureau had looked at it and found, in fact, there were issues, the Bureau has a variety of things it could do besides issuing citations. I mean, it can, start a process to see whether there are people who were, if they were not providing, if they didn't have sufficient, one of the requirements is that they have sufficient resources to provide the education. And the Bureau could look at that if it seems there's a problem with that. Or if people weren't getting the education that they were promised. I mean, the Bureau can look at those things. They could have done an unannounced inspection. I mean, maybe they did, I don't know. But there are things that the Bureau could do to take those steps earlier on. Would it still have collapsed? Possibly. But could it have prevented a few dozen or a few hundred or a few thousand students from being in that situation, reduce the amount if they'd acted or been able to act earlier? Yes, I think so. And I do appreciate that the Bureau is making a lot of strides to deal with this, and I very much appreciate the fact that once the legislature has their sunset thing, which has wound up twice now, killing the Bureau, and then the Bureau having to start again. And that is a disaster. And I have, said many times it should not be a sunset that kills the agency. A sunset review should look at what's wrong and propose changes. But you kill the agency, you lose the institutional memory, you lose the time where you're doing new regulations. I agree. But I think we're at the point now where we need to see the changes. But those are the kind of things that I think I'd like to see, are these changes now addressing that so that we're getting on that sooner? And of course, one of the issues, we've had is, I don't know if the inspections were done of these schools, but we know that we're way behind where we need to be on inspections and are trying to catch up. And I think that is a question. Yeah.
So to Margaret's point, I think I'd be very interested whether we're talking about, ECA schools like Brightwood specifically, or just more broadly, a timeline of, once a school has been approved by the Bureau to operate, if X happens, then Y, right? So if a school goes on to show cause or has an issue with their accreditation, what does that trigger and what responsibilities does the Bureau have once that happens? I think it would be very interesting to whether that's drawing up a hypothetical scenario or whether it's using a specific instance for the members, of this committee to better understand, what are the specific responsibilities, and if there are places where, perhaps if there's smoke, we should be investigating the fire. That might help illuminate that a little bit.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think just having almost an educational hypothetical walkthrough of just, this is a hypothetical school. And I think, part of where I hear Margaret coming from is we know in any area of anything, having just a tip procedure doesn't always help the most vulnerable who may be not as likely to report a tip. But I also understand that that's the constructs of which you all are in. So I think just having that refresher about, if not a tip, this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen would be helpful.
I think this sort of goes to the conversations we've had previously about getting more detail around complaints, because as we've been discussing, a lot of, indications do come from tips and complaints. And I think it's very hard to really understand, how the Bureau is addressing complaints when we're not given a lot of detail about specific complaints that are made and how they're handled. Coming from working in legal services and having clients who have made complaints to the Bureau in the past and more recently, and seeing sometimes how those complaints are addressed, particularly because, a lot of students who do make complaints might come from very vulnerable, disadvantaged backgrounds and don't necessarily know how to explain and point out in documentation how, what exactly is going wrong, and being able to support their complaints. I think how, what complaints, how are they being made, and then how the Bureau is sort of addressing it, following up. I think, I know it's really detailed, and I know there are issues of privacy concerns and concerns about investigations, but I think really getting into the details is really helpful in terms of understanding how the system works and how these issues are being raised in the Bureau.
All good points. From my understanding, I know historically, and I think this might have even been prior to my arrival, I think this was done. But I have no problem with having to talk with the team and trying to see about just kind of walking you guys through scenarios. I have no problem with that. I think that's easy.
And I think that ties in as part of this discussion also, which is I had requested, as Megumi had pointed out, that we'd like more detail about complaints and how they're handled. And I think we discussed how that can be done without getting into privacy concerns. And so, and it's, I don't know how many meetings now I've requested that. So at this point, what I'd like to do is move that for the next meeting that we provided with a random sampling of complaints, particularly ones that have been determined to be unsubstantiated, not jurisdictional, or for whatever reason not resolved to the satisfaction of the student. And those complaints should be provided in such a way that doesn't intrude on privacy or interfere with private investigative techniques, but should let us understand the process and the results.
So if you look at the agenda, I think that's already something that we had on there in regards for a status update on that. So I think we've kind of done that.
Oh, sorry, I looked at the agenda and I didn't see where that really was. So I'll reserve my motion until then. Thank you very much.
All right. Moving, do you want to do public comment between each section? Yeah, okay. So public comment on Dr. Marian's update. Oh, yeah, 5A and B.
Good morning. My name is Angela Perry, and I'm with the Institute for College Access and Success, TICAS. I first want to thank the Bureau for that update and for all of the work that the Bureau is undertaking. I know that this has been an undertaking for sure, and a lot of work has gone into this, and I am so encouraged by all of the work and the changes that I do see taking place at the Bureau. That is, I really want to take a moment to appreciate that and recognize that. I was excited by a lot of the ideas we just heard in this discussion. I think that there were a lot of great ideas proposed. I do think that there is a role as a part of the triad for the Bureau and the state of California to proactively look for problems, to look for smoke, right? And to identify problems when it's possible so that they can be addressed before they reach the level of a school closure, before students are affected in these large numbers. So I do think that there is value to that. And I do think that it would be valuable to better understand what the Bureau's protocol is in those situations. When you identify a problem, what are the triggers? What are the steps that are taken when an accreditor signals that there is a problem with accreditation? When the federal government does start to control financials or anything like that? When other state agencies have initiated investigations, does the Bureau have protocols in place to take action at those points, and what those actions are? I think understanding that would give us all a better sense of what the Bureau is doing and proactively doing, and give us a better sense of that. I also think, and I know I've said this before, but I will repeat it, that if there are things that advocates and other folks can do to help the Bureau accomplish its goals, I am very eager to be helpful. If there are legislative changes, if there are staffing needs, if there are financial needs, if there are connections that we can help create, or relationships between state agencies that can be established and strengthened. If there are, I heard a mention of expanding jurisdiction. If jurisdiction is missing, and there are powers that the Bureau needs that it does not have, identifying those would be incredibly helpful, so that folks can help to try to make those changes happen. The worst possible scenario is that the Bureau identifies a problem and then doesn't have the agency to take action, right? And that's the worst possible scenario. So we want to make sure that the Bureau is empowered to take all of the action necessary. And I really want to make myself available. If there are ideas that I can be helpful with, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on 5A or B? Good morning, Robert.
Good morning. Good morning.
I don't think that one's on. Oh, there.
Robert Johnson, California Association of Private Secondary Schools.
Still not on.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
There it is.
Robert Johnson, California Association of Private Post-Secondary Schools. While the previous speaker was essentially eager to expand everybody's jurisdiction and spend everybody's money, the reality of it is that, particularly in regards to school closures, CAPS has been involved virtually in every school closure for the last 20-some years. The vast majority of closures are planned. They are taught out. The students are graduated. What we're talking about here is outliers. And as somebody who ran a public agency for decades, I would say is that you can't put your main punch into outlying issues. You have to keep it in the middle of the road, keep on doing what are the most important things to do. To essentially put together a program to spy on schools or rumor monger or do those kinds of things that are frankly not fact-based is an enormous waste of time, and it would be an enormous waste of resources. Although the number of schools are declining to the point where maybe we can put a person in every school at some point. That would make everybody happy. But the reality of this is this. The money drove the issues here. In almost all of the major publicly tradeds, which are no longer around, the Department of Education had a large letter of credit on file. That letter of credit could have been exercised to keep the schools open longer to provide an orderly shutdown. But on the political side, the student advocates in particularly were incensed that the department will consider paying teachers and paying landlords to extend the campus life to teach out students because they saw it as a benefit to the owners of the school which were closing. So the politics of that situation is that it's a student help to avoid an abrupt closure. There have been suggestions over time, including caps on a reauthorization, where we had looked at allocating part of the STRIF to allow the Bureau to step into the closed school status and make an independent decision as to whether or not they continue classes at a nearby school or at that actual location if the landlord was amenable, because these are often lease issues to some degree when you look at closures, overcommitted of leases, way high overheads. There's no public subsidy for these schools. So they make a bad business decision, it's pretty much over. So it's one of those things where if the department had allowed that letter of credit to be exercised by the states or with the state's blessings in terms of what campuses to keep open, which ones to close, which students to transfer, which students were close to being taught out, a number of very doable kinds of actions that could have certainly relieved the pain of these abrupt closures. But the reality is as David Weiss mentioned, when the money's gone, the money's gone. You know, if you can't pay staff, if you can't pay your adjuncts or your professors, they're not going to stick around. I mean, some might, but the majority are saying, like, I can't afford it, I need to get another job. So the reality of it is somebody could step in for that and look at that. You know, we certainly put that on the table before. We're happy to do that again. We're not eager to spend large amounts of STRIF dollars since students pay for that. But there may be situations where the state can make a decision that it is appropriate to step in as kind of a local parentis and essentially take over that operation and then teach it out. So in terms of the Bureau's inability to forecast and crystal ball who's going to close, all I can say is good luck with that. We have better in-sources to tell people when they're going down, and oftentimes we're fooled. So, you know, if somebody really thinks that somehow there's a special process that you can employ to figure out if a school is going to close or not, I'm very, very eager to hear that.
Thank you, Robert. Any other public comment on 5A or B?
Can I follow up on something?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Dave.
Dr. Marian, how close does the Bureau work with the department, education department, to know about these things and maybe to just say, hey, figure something else out, stop with, you know, the approaches you're taking. They don't get to see the issues they create. You guys are stuck with all this stuff. And maybe to work a little bit more cooperatively with everybody to have a orderly close.
So we work closely with them, but I think just like anything else, it can always get better.
And I think you also have to keep in mind that generally speaking, you know, as part of the triad, it's not like the accreditor or the Department of Ed is notifying the Bureau before they take action. It's not like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. It's, hey, we did this. So, and they don't, none of the triad have any obligation to notify the other members of the triad before they do something. It would be great if they did, but they don't have to do that. And I think what ends up happening is that the other two legs of the stool end up not knowing something's happening until there's nothing that they can do about it. And going back to our hypothetical school, the campuses in California that closed were not the ones that had the accreditation issue. They just happened to be owned by the same company that ran out of money. Mm-hmm. So in that case, the hypothetical school would not have had any smoke because that hypothetical school was not the one that was having the issues. So, that's another challenge, is that, the Bureau isn't going to know, and I get Margaret's point that maybe the Bureau would have known if there was some inspection that indicated some problem, but to Robert's point, not even the schools themselves didn't even know at some point what was happening, because this was happening at the top level. And when you have that kind of ownership structure with schools down below, a lot of times they're just chugging along and think everything's great. And then all of a sudden they're being told, oh, we're out of money. So even if the school knew, they couldn't have told the Bureau. So I think, there are certain things that I think it would be great if there was more interaction between the triad before decisions are made. But I think that's that's something that would kind of have to leave the states and the accreditor. And maybe as part of the Higher Education Reauthorization Act, they're going through all this process now. They're talking about changes to how the triad's going to work. I mean, maybe that's something at the national level we should be talking about more, so that the different legs can all be communicating before decisions are made, so that they can come up with a plan instead of this, what keeps happening with these outliers where it's all of a sudden overnight the school's, shutting down. But that's something for Michael to work on at the with NASAPS or whoever else has the ear of Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray and at the national level to push for more of that communication.
Well, since we went on with this discussion a little bit, I don't know if this is appropriate because we had the comment, but we sort of reopened the discussion. Just a couple of things to be clear. I'm not just talking about when schools close. I'm talking about when there are major problems with schools. And that could be private litigation, that could be prosecutions, when people, besides the Bureau, have figured out something's really going on wrong here. So it's not just an issue with closed schools. And to be clear also, I'm not suggesting that we need to spy or rumor monger or have a crystal ball. There may be instances when the Bureau won't be able to know in advance. But it seems to me we have had one after another of these major schools prosecuted or closed, and I'm not seeing the Bureau in the forefront. And some of that is, as you pointed out, Mike, that the Bureau had to set itself up and get its regulations, and all those things take time. But I think we're at the point now where we need to be focusing on, are we going to be in the forefront to prevent some of these things before they get to that level? And maybe if we don't know enough about the finances, maybe we need to have those finances audited on a more regular basis. By the time they're audited, or maybe we need to require the schools to turn over their audits that the feds are doing every year if they're in the Title IV program. We can do some things by regulation and statute so that we have that information. I think right now the schools are required to report any, I'm not sure if it's just final actions, but there's certain actions by their accreditor. And if it is, I can't remember, if it is just final actions, then maybe we need to change that language so that we get notice if there's any kind of action by the accreditor. So, those are the things I think that we need to be looking at. Thank you. And again, I really do understand, what this Bureau, this agency has gone through. I've seen it, 2 different times now where it's been destroyed. And that's the legislature's problem, not the Bureau's. And I know it's taken time to set it up and get it running again. And I do appreciate all the effort that is being made, but I think, it would be helpful if we could see more what can be done. Thank you.
All right. Next up, Compliance and Discipline Report, item 5C. Morning, Beth.
Good morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Beth Scott. I'm going to be speaking to you today about the discipline, cite, and fine, and the compliance. It'll be section 5C in the packet. The first thing I'm going to speak about is the discipline, which is page 26 and 27 on your attachments for some detail. So what we have provided is page 26 will be the statement of issues, and as was requested, we've mapped out the final decisions and the actions for 2018 and 2019 to give you an idea of the issues behind those actions. On page 27 is the same information for accusations.
I have different page
Yeah, we have
numbers.
different page numbers.
There's different pages between what was sent out and what was provided today.
Oh,
Different
okay.
page numbers.
Okay, hold on one second, Beth. So I have
Okay.
26 and 27 as the org chart. 29, so it's this one. Okay, got it. So 29 in the packets we got today. Sorry, everyone. Thanks, Beth.
Okay, sorry about that. Didn't realize the pages had changed. So we have the statement of issues, detail, and then the next page is the accusations, along with the pending AG cases and the other actions. So last month, myself, along with our enforcement task force, Laura and Stephanie met with our DAG liaison, our Deputy Attorney General DAG liaison, to talk about some things we can do in monitoring our cases and some improvements we can make in the monitoring of our cases and the processing of our cases. So I really want to thank the enforcement task force for helping us in this area. And I do want to thank the staff for their dedication in the area of discipline and cite and fine. We've gave you some details here, and we're making great strides in the things that are pending and monitoring. So I do want to thank the staff for that. Do you have any questions on the detailed, or is there something different you would like to see? I tried to hit the areas that you had requested at the prior meetings, but if there's more detail or some clarification you need, we can certainly provide that in the future.
I'm still a little confused. On the packet that was sent out, you're looking at page 26, correct? And the packet that you sent today, you're looking at page 32? Is that the one you're talking about?
I think it's 29.
Beth, does it look like this?
It's this one. It's page 29.
That's the compliance inspections. It looks like this. It says discipline stats on the top.
Okay.
Pages
Page
32 and
32.
33 are the two that she's looking at.
All right.
Okay,
found it.
so I do have a question then. So this, A says default, denial upheld. I don't quite understand. Maybe you can just walk through quickly. Maybe I should understand these, but I'm not following. This is where you've taken a disciplinary action, and these are the results of those disciplinary actions?
Yeah, for 2018 and 2019. 2019, there has been actions, but the final decision is not yet arrived, so those numbers will go up at the next meeting. The actions are the default revocation, the proposed decision, stipulated surrender, and so forth. So those are the final decisions. That particular one in 2018 was revoked by default.
Meaning they didn't respond?
Yes, so an accusation was filed and the school did not come forward to address that, and so it was a default revocation.
So that on page 32, these are disciplinary actions, and page 33 are citation, or 30, I'm sorry. 31 are citations, 32 are disciplinary actions, correct?
Yes, right now I'm speaking just of the disciplinary actions, yes. So breaking it down between statement of issues for the applications denied, and then the accusations for discipline taken on a licensed school.
What does PC 23 mean?
PC 23 is our ability to go into the criminal court and request that the judge limit the activity based on criminal matters.
Oh, okay.
Beth, how many, on page 31, the citation stats, How many of these citations were to the same school? Were there a lot of multiple citations?
Citations for the same school, not to my knowledge, no. The majority of these are separate schools. We combine issues and issue one citation if possible. If something happens the next year that was not available, it would be, but the majority of these are separate schools for sure.
Just want to clarify on your discipline stats on page 32. I don't know if all the members know, what the difference is between a statement of issues and an accusation. So I just wanted to point out, or for example, under actions, it says default denial upheld. A statement of issues is the charging document when the Bureau has denied an application, and an accusation is when the Bureau is revoking a current approval to operate. So they're all kind of categorized under discipline, but the statement of issues really deals with the denial of an application.
Okay, and moving on to the cite and fine statistics.
So just really quick. So
Yes,
in
sir.
2019, you guys are on a tear with citations, right? You got 35 already, and
Yeah.
last year you only had 117.
Yes, sir.
That's good. Okay.
Thank you.
You're happy down
Let's
there.
focus on that. Yes, so the citations, broke them down from 2017, 2018, and then current from January 1st, and then the allegations of the citations on the lower part of that page, so you can see what the citations were issued for across the bottom there. Is there any questions on the citations? We are working on all of the citations that we have pending in anticipation of the task force developing a lot of the cases to come to citation. So we currently, we're on path to, we have about 50 to issue right now, and then we will be flush with everything issued that we have pending.
Okay.
A quick question. Given its relevance to our earlier conversation, what is the driver for a financial resources citation?
Could be a ratio or a composite score.
In the federal sphere, or is it something unique to the Bureau? It would be in their annual report.
It could be. It could be when the annual report unit receives financials, they are looking for composite scores. We do monitor the HCM1 and HCM2 list and the documentation from the federal government. And if we are alerted to that and the composite score is out of compliance and the school is deemed financially irresponsible, then we will issue the citation for that. If that's information that we have, we do have that information for inspection purposes to look for items that might be occurring if somebody is in financial dire straits on an inspection. So we do take that into consideration.
I'm sorry, I'm not up on the acronyms. H something.
HCM.
The heightened cash monitoring for,
From the feds.
yes.
And there's two forms of that for those who don't know. There's HCM1, there's HCM2. HCM1 just is, you still can be pre-funded. When you're HCM2, the school essentially has to front the funds and wait for the department to give the funds to the school, which is why when big schools go on HCM2, it's a catastrophic because they often end up waiting 30, 60, 90 days to get funds.
6 months sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes 6 months. It's supposed
not
to be
just
a
big
30 to
schools.
60 day, but
It's any school going on HCM2, isn't it?
yeah, it can be
doo-doo.
the end of the world. So
Do you receive those from the feds or from the schools, the HC, the monitoring or the cash requirement?
Could be both. Sometimes the Department of Education will send us a notification. We also have access to the Department of Education's composite score list, which is not completely current. It's current as to their action, but it can be behind the time. or the school may identify based on the requirement to let us know what's going on. So that happens occasionally. It could be during an inspection.
Do you have instances where the schools should be letting you know but are not?
I do know of a citation that had a charge on for a school not letting us know under the requirement.
The requirement for notifying you of changes?
Exactly.
basically.
When we found out and they had not, then there is a charge in one of the citations for that.
And then you said the feds sometimes let you know.
We do get notifications from Department of Education.
Is that
It's usually after the fact or during an action they're taken.
And is that done on a regular basis? You can count on that? Or is it not necessarily regular? You get them sometimes and other times not?
I don't have information to compare that to versus
Right.
what they have taken versus what we have. I don't know of a comparative measure I can take to know what we're getting there.
And on the list that they publish, let's say they take an action on Monday, the 1st of a month. How soon does that get on their published list if you have a sense of that?
On their public,
I think it's quarterly that they
Yeah.
update that list.
So it could be
and it is public.
Yeah, so it could be 3 months before you would get that information after they took some kind of action.
It could be, but I have seen the notifications sooner.
Mm-hmm.
My experience with the schools that I know that have gone on to HCM1 or HCM2 is that the Bureau knows immediately or knows very
Yeah,
shortly
I've seen
after.
it sooner than quarterly. We have established some collaboration with these agencies that we work with that give us that information pretty quickly.
Okay. I guess I would just say that, yeah, that would be great if you could just be sure that they're getting that to you on a regular basis. So I'm glad to know that you have some coordination to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the compliance unit, we have some statistics. I did a comparative to last year.
Is that this one, Beth, the completed inspection chart
Yes.
you're looking at? Okay.
I apologize for the misnumbering.
So page 30, it looks like on the packet from today. 29? Oh, sorry, I had the wrong side up.
Yes. So we have some comparative. So we have increased our inspections by 82% from last year, along with an increase of our unannounced. We continue to work collaboratively with investigations and other boards on joint inspections, and we have set a goal of 3 inspections per month for inspectors, and we're diligently working towards that goal. On these charts, I have listed out, and I've also added the inspections canceled, because that is a workload, just as a notation there during the year. In 2018, there was 7 of those, and the inspections canceled could be because the school closed when the process was underway. They were denied a renewal when the process was underway, or they refused to allow us to inspect, which would lead to further action. We'd take that action and then go inspect when that's cleared up. So that is occurring. So that is a workload there. So I wanted you to have that information.
Beth, when you say the school closed during the inspection process, you mean like permanently closed while you're in the middle of the inspection?
Yes, or
Wow.
We notify a school if it's an announced we're coming to inspect, and when we send the notice, they're like, well, we closed. We taught out all the students and closed. So that occurs, but sometimes it's in the midst of the inspection. It could be.
Yeah, but real quick, I probably think it's important to explain the inspection process. So we started obviously way before we just get there.
Yes. So you want me to explain the inspection process? So if it's an announced inspection, then we notify the school, per our obligation to notify them in advance that we will be coming. We request some documents in advance. The school does not have to provide them, but we request the catalog, the enrollment agreement, things that we can look at in advance because the documents can be lengthy. If we can do some upfront review to notify the school of some things that need changed prior to our arrival, we will let them know These are the things that we've identified, and then we go to the school and inspect, and anything during that inspection, the minor violations that cannot be rectified by the end of the day would be put on a notice to comply, and the school would have 30 days to rectify that. Any potential material violations that are identified during that inspection process would be referred to our investigator unless an investigator is on site with us, and they will take those potential material violations and investigate them with what they're there to investigate for. On an unannounced inspection, it's just that. We show up. And, if there are documents we can look at prior to be prepared for what, we will do that. Sometimes there's some things on the web we can look at, and we'll do that in advance. If not, we go and we do the same inspection that we would do if we had the documents. So we review the minimum operating standards. We look at the equipment, the facility, speak to students, without school staff there, and look at student records, current, withdrawn, graduated, do calculations of refunds. So it's a very comprehensive inspection process, very time-consuming, comprehensive process.
So just the point I was trying to make is that we do a lot of stuff before we go on the inspection, but the school, to Beth's point, could close before we get there.
Yes,
That's
yes.
what I was trying to, the point I was
Okay. So additional information for your enjoyment.
I have a question. How far in advance do you notify the school that you're coming?
We have to at least 7 days in advance on an announced. So we'll let them know and get there relatively, soon. We work with the school when it's announced. We have a little bit of leeway to make it convenient for the school without adding a lot of time onto it. So if it's announced, and they need us to go the next week, we may do that if it works for both sides. So on the announced, we want it to be, as less intrusive as it possibly can, because it's a lot for the day of the school also.
They also want to make sure that there's students there that day, so
Yes.
that's part of the scheduling process with the school.
Yeah, so sometimes if the students are only there on Saturday, we go then, or at night, we go then.
I have a question. In regards to your preparatory work before doing an inspection, either unannounced or announced, to what degree is that prep informed by student complaints? So in the sense that you have different divisions, you're reviewing the catalog, there's web-based resources that you can look at, but you also have internal data as far as what complaints that school may have received in the past. Is there a productive or meaningful connection between those two data points?
Yes, there is. There's collaboration with those two, but just the understanding that if it's an announced inspection, the school can choose to give us documents in advance, but they're under no obligation to do that. So they may choose not to, just for whatever reason. And the inspection takes place on site. So, if we pull a catalog off a web, we have to get to the school and make sure that that is indeed the catalog that they're utilizing, which could be not the case. So, which is an issue, but we have to relook at that entire catalog during that inspection. So we try to, it is a lot of work. It can be 40 hours at least to prepare for an announced inspection, that when a school realizes we're coming and is providing the documents that we need. If a catalog is 1,200 pages, an inspector reads 1,200 pages. That's how we find the prohibited business practices. So we're not just looking for what needs to be in there, we're looking for what shouldn't be in there. So it's a lot of prep work.
Sure, and I appreciate that. My question again specifically was related to student complaints. So do you review the student complaints that school's received prior to doing the visit?
Well, what we do is if a school is going to be inspected that has complaints, we work collaboratively with the investigator, and the investigator will either travel with us, or if they need us to obtain documents while we're there for them, we could obtain some documents while we're there. But it's a very collaborative effort to deal with the complaint at the same time, and the complaint may give you insight to where some focus may need to be on the inspection also.
So yeah, that last point was the heart of my question: is what insight do your site visits get from your investigations unit, and because they're separate, and is that collaboration systemic or ad hoc?
Well, they're only. I'm not, if I'm not understanding your question. We're working. We're right the next cubicle. So we're meeting. We actually meet for the pre-inspection and talk about the.
That's it. So the investigation unit meets with the
inspector, yes, and the managers, and we say we have these open complaints. What's the plan? Do we need to look at more student files? Is the complaint, I'm not getting refunds, so we really need to focus a lot on refunds. If they're in financial dire straits, then we may look at equipment. We may look at faculty, of course, refunds, anything that a school may do because they're low on money, repairs.
So the answer is yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, the answer is.
I had a question. On the schools that refused to allow inspection, how many were there from that set of that 7? How many were those?
3.
3. And were those announced or unannounced inspections that were refused?
2 announced, 1 unannounced.
And you were subsequently able then to go ahead and get your inspections done?
Well, yes, we're going to get our inspections done.
Not yet, but you're in the process.
Those we have on one of them. The other needs to go through the citation process or different. Sometimes they're unhappy to see us, and so the inspectors. I may take the call that day. It can be kind of shocking if that's not what they're expecting to do for that day, and they're not happy we're there. And then after, our inspectors are very professional and diligent in what they do and try to be as least intrusive, but they need to get their job done. So it may require them backing off and letting it sink in that we're there, and I may get the call that the inspectors are in the parking lot and we're gonna try this again. We're gonna come back to the door and we're gonna see if we can come in. But of course, if we're not going to, if we're going to take other avenues, if they refuse, we're going to go away and take our other necessary means. But we're going to pursue that. Inspections are not always convenient, but they need to happen, and they're going to happen. So we get compliance. It's not a large amount. You can see it's not that many. Most schools are extremely helpful and appreciative. That we're there. They really are appreciative that we're there to answer questions and, very appreciative of the process.
Something wrong? Oh, okay.
Beth, on the unannounced, I know my accrediting body is one of the few that do unannounced, but we went to a 24-hour notice just to make sure the people were there, a room could get set up. There's not a lot a school can do to, even with 24-hour notice, you're going to see what you've got. But that way, the correct people are there. If they were scheduled to travel or go visit employers and other things, it just makes it that much more effective. Would that help your team get through more just by providing a 24-hour notice on an unannounced?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'm not sure that would be consistent with the law because it differentiates between the unannounced and announced. So.
Yeah, we haven't had a situation was required to have somebody there. We may wait a half hour for somebody, but we haven't had a situation that the lack of people being there has really impeded what we need to do. Somebody may need to come over, or typically somebody is there that, can authorize us to get going. People can, the staff can get us going on pulling files and getting what we need while.
Yeah, we're not at a rock concert.
Yeah.
We don't need you that close.
I'm so nervous about you not being able to hear all this awesome information that I'm super. So it hasn't really been an issue. It's.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I've had situations where I've had students making complaints when there's been an unannounced visit, and they've told me, like, the inspectors here and the school is asking me to leave, So I think giving those kinds of schools 24-hour notice
Okay.
is giving them notice to ask students not to come to school.
Yeah, and that's where we really want to be there for the students, so.
I had one other question, and that is in a future report, and I think this probably fits here. If there are schools in the future that are major schools that are closing or are being sued or prosecuted, what might be helpful in the reporting aspect would be to have a timeline of what went on before, if anything. So for example, school closes on X date. Was there a heightened monitoring? What level 1, level 2, was there an accreditation, OSC, was there an inspection on what date, those kind of things. And that might help deal with some of the questions I had about, what is happening before the awful event.
Yeah, I think that Dr. Marian took that under advisement for future. And our inspections are on the web. It is a manual process. Once a school, so you can look on the web at, it's as up to date as it can be with our limitations. We're pretty diligent about keeping that up to date.
There's still a way to search by date, is there? It's just by school name?
You can do a search by school code. We are now reflecting when a school name changes because we want the public to be able to see that that school was inspected under another name in case the name just changes, so you will be able to search it by name. You can do the control find. I find the school codes that way.
No, I was asking whether there's a way to, the last I looked, I couldn't figure out a way to search by date. So if I wanted to see what the inspections have been over the last month, I wouldn't be able to find that. I'd have to search under a school name.
Yes,
And
at this point.
At this point,
At
till
this
we
point, but that might be something that with the new system we'll be able to be more comprehensive.
I've never looked, but do you differentiate the citations on the website by felonies and misdemeanors?
That's not a part of it.
I mean, you've got font size issues versus, serious citations. Or this school has 3 citations.
Well, if it's serious, what you're talking felony, it's probably going to be more than a citation.
Okay.
So it'll be an accusation. So, a citation is an administrative fine for not for less serious. If it rises to the level of discipline, you're going to see an accusation on the discipline section for the school.
I have a quick question about reading the chart on, I guess it's page 23 of what was sent out earlier.
Page 29.
Yes. So where it has the row notice to comply issue and enforcement referral issued, is there any double counting between them? Like, is it possible that you would issue a school both a notice to comply and an enforcement referral? Or are
yes.
they all? Okay.
Yes, for sure. Okay. If they have minor violations, then they're going to get the notice to comply and they have the 30 days. Potential material violations cannot be put on a notice to comply, so they would require an enforcement referral or an investigation, a possible investigation, or something more than a notice to comply. A notice to comply is, and we could find both issues, or we could find potential material and not minor because the school has worked to clear those or didn't have any, or you could have a school with neither, or you could have with both.
Okay.
So,
Nope, I was just going to say thank you to Beth, but you have something else
welcome.
you'd like to add.
thank you, Beth.
You're welcome.
Just so a quick update for everybody for this next piece, we have Silda, who is one of our managers, is going to be giving this report. Due to the reorg, we don't have an enforcement chief in that area, but we are with the reclassification in that space. We're going to be hiring, and Margaret, I'm sure you would like this. We will be hiring a special investigator too. That has a pure background in this space. And so this is part of the reorg that we're doing on the task force and some of the things. And so Silda, one of our managers, is going to give the update this time.
And they get paid more, so you're more able to fill a position, right? For if you have an investigator.
Sorry, say again?
An investigator too gets paid more, don't they? So you're more able to fill a position.
Someone's going to be more likely to want it, you mean?
I hope. Yeah, actually, they just did the testing for it at the end of December. So we're hoping that we're going to get somebody outstanding.
Thank you, Dr. Marian. Good morning, everyone.
I'm looking at page 28 of the original materials that were sent out earlier. Not sure what page it is now.
Say discipline stats on the top.
It says complaint investigation statistics. There's a violet margin up on top.
35 in the current.
Page 35.
Okay.
So I'm pleased to share some good news about the progress that our team has made over the last quarter. In addition to being fact finders, our investigators are also at times advocates on behalf of the students. And in 2018, they were able to obtain a total of $131,000 in refunds either directly to the students or to their federal student aid account. The other benefits listed here were reported on at the last meeting, but they are part of the aggregate student impact for 2018. We've made some progress on the number of complaints closed since the last report. And when we say closed, we mean referrals for citation or discipline, cases in which compliance was obtained or a settlement was mediated, or allegations that were found to be non-jurisdictional or unsubstantiated. So we're looking at the orange line here on the chart, and you'll see that in 2018, we closed a total of 797 cases, which is a 31% increase from the 607 that we closed the prior year. And since the last meeting, we've also had a marked improvement in Q4 closures as compared to Q4 in the previous year. We've had a strong start to 2019 with 157 closures just in January, and that's a 600% improvement from the 26 closures that we had this time last year. This is also equivalent to the total number of closures just in the first 4 months of 2018 combined. Moving on to the next page. Of the 797 closures, 11% were referred for citation, 1% referred for disciplinary action, and 88% were closed as compliance obtained, mediated settlement, non-jurisdictional, or unsubstantiated. As far as how long it took us to close the cases, in 2018, 29% of our cases were closed within 180 days. The task force that Dr. Marian spoke of earlier is focusing on the cases that are over a year old currently. The bottom chart shows the top 5 closure reasons in sale in 2018, the largest category being not substantiated. On the next page, we have a snapshot of complaints received, and you'll see that it's remained pretty steady over the last couple of years at an average of about 61 per month. The middle chart here shows that the percentage of cases generated internally versus externally has remained the same in 2018 as in 2017. And the bottom chart here shows the top 5 allegation categories in sale, with the top category being fraud other. And I believe it was explained in previous reports that the fraud other category has served as a catch-all for allegations for which sale doesn't have a specific category. So this includes inaccurate, falsified, or missing records, and the selling of hours.
What is sale? What is sale?
Sorry, that is our database.
Thank you.
And we have had some process improvements with sale toward the end of 2018. We have added categories that are more defined and will more accurately reflect the true allegations and reasons for closure. So we expect to be able to improve the reporting of that in 2019. The final page here looks at the case age of complaints. And at the end of 2018, we ended with 74% of the complaints over 180 days old. Again, we are working hard to address those older complaints. And the middle section here shows in 2018, we made a little more progress with internally generated complaints than in the previous year. And finally, at the bottom, the good news is, whereas at the last meeting in November, we reported cases pending at 1,174 at the end of the third quarter. We closed out January of this year with 973 cases pending, and as of yesterday, we had 906 cases pending. That's 23% less than what we reported at the last meeting. That concludes my presentation. Thanks for the opportunity to share with you some good news about the progress that our team's
I think it needs to be noted that I want to give kudos to Yvette, Silda, the whole team in enforcement that have done an amazing job of knocking out some of these complaints, and you guys are doing a great job. And I think it's important for people to know that the fact that we were able to get it down to 906 as of yesterday is a huge improvement, and I don't see anything but that number continue to go down, especially in the next couple months.
What type of things of complaints might be over 3 years old? I mean, looks like we still have 138. What type of, are they in a particular bucket?
There isn't a particular bucket. We do have some internal kind of enforcement referrals that are a little bit older. And, again, with increased staffing, we're looking to be able to address those.
I had some questions. On page 29 of what was sent to us, 36, I guess, of today's packet, at the top, the case disposition shows a category. It has in compliance obtained, mediated, non-jurisdictional, unsubstantiated. And can you point out to me, I think those are broken down somewhere. Is that what's, or are they not broken down? So I could see, for example, what percentage are compliance obtained versus unsubstantiated?
Right,
Down at
so
the bottom.
somewhat, yes. The bar chart at the bottom just breaks down the top 5 closure categories in sale. Not necessarily inclusive of all closure reasons that are part of the 88%.
Okay, so that'd be the closest thing. Then the next question I have is on the bottom of page 29, what's the difference between unsubstantiated and insufficient evidence?
So with insufficient evidence, usually there's some evidence found to meet one or two or some of the elements to support a violation, but not all to meet the burden of proof.
And what does unsubstantiated mean?
Unsubstantiated is the investigator, did the due diligence to conduct the investigation, was just not able to find evidence to support the allegation. Sometimes it's just completely, untrue or false, unfounded.
Right. But unsubstantiation is not a determination that it was untrue or false. It's just that there was not evidence in
To
the
support that a
complaint to
violation.
support it.
Right.
Okay. And then on the I've lost where it is with all these wonderful charts. I guess it's again the top of page 36 on today's packet. You have referred for citation, referred for disciplinary action, and those are closed at the point when it is referred for citation.
Correct. So as far as the investigation is concerned, it's closed. We hand over to the discipline unit.
And if it's referred, for example, to the Attorney General for further prosecution, is that what's considered part of referred for disciplinary action?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Can you give examples of what's in the non-jurisdictional bucket?
Sometimes we find at intake that the allegations are not within the jurisdiction of the laws and regulations of the Bureau. We then refer out to the appropriate agency and close out as non-jurisdictional.
Okay. So if someone has an issue with their federal student loans and they think that maybe loans were taken out that shouldn't have been taken out, or they don't think that they've been getting the refund checks that they should have from their federal student loans. I understand that there are remedies that are outside of the Bureau's jurisdiction, but would that be considered within the Bureau's jurisdiction?
Yes, if there's been a falsification of records, that would be within our jurisdiction to investigate.
Okay.
Any other questions from the panel?
I did. Can you talk a little bit about how you determine the priority level, like what's urgent, what's routine?
Good question. A few years ago, there was a complaint prioritization formula that was developed for us. And essentially, it calculates a risk score that's based on the age of the complaint, the population of the surrounding community, the status of the institution, the number of open complaints against that institution, and the allegation. And that risk score then places that complaint into a category of either urgent, high, or routine.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you both very
Thank you.
much. Any public comment on this part of the presentation? Welcome back.
Yes, Robert Johnson, California Association of Private Post-Secondary Schools. Just a more of a technical point. I get a lot of calls, but not a lot about how people love the Bureau. I mean, I'm sure Michael probably gets the same number of calls about, more problems than solutions. One of the issues that we get frequently are in the notice of the announced inspection. It's a 7-day, supposedly, notice. But there's a thing called the U.S. mail, and there's also a thing called the weekend. And oftentimes between the day that the Bureau mails the notice of announced inspection, must go out on Fridays. I'm not sure when it actually goes out. But by the time the school actually receives that, it's less than 48 hours often before the visit. Now, there are occasions where schools have called up and said, can we get an extension? And they've got that. Other cases, people play fairly hardball. So given the fact that it doesn't say working days, it just says days, is there a way that the Bureau can email a 7-day notice rather than actually stick it in the mail? It would be very helpful. Oftentimes when it's a less than a 48-hour or 72-hour notice, you have to recall staff, you have to do some things that they may be traveling or vacation or whatever it is. So the more notice it provides more quality experience to the school and to the reviewer as well. So just I don't get a ton of those calls, but I do get enough. I thought I'd mention it. Thank you.
She's back. She's gone. Okay.
You wanted to say something.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not, but I had earlier moved that we be provided with a random sampling of closed complaints redacted to eliminate privacy information.
Yes, so sorry about that.
Complaint file.
Yep, and it was under that section, so the previous one.
It's the right place?
Yep, it's the right place.
Okay, that we be provided that for our next meeting.
Yes.
And I would ask for a second.
I second.
And so just to give you guys an update, and so with the reorg, so that's why we have it on here as a status update. And when we get the person in that position to be able to, so when we get the special investigator 2 in, that's when we'll provide that report. Is that okay?
I would assume that could be before our next meeting or by our next meeting.
That's my hope is real soon.
All right, so yes, that's my motion. And
You asked for a random, I'm sorry, we have a motion.
Can you repeat the motion if you don't mind?
Sure, I'll try to make it as clear as possible. I move that for our next advisory committee meeting, that the committee members be provided with a random sampling sufficient to give us an idea of how complaints are closed, and that the material provided include complaints and the steps that were taken to resolve those complaints, but that information that would interfere with privacy of the complainant or with investigative techniques that are confidential be redacted. And I will leave open the number of complaints and complaint information that should be provided, simply saying that it be sufficient to give us an idea, and that those closed complaints particularly include unsubstantiated, non-jurisdictional, insufficient evidence.
So
I have a question or concern. How would you reconcile random and particularly include?
can we make it representative versus random, just in the buckets?
Random, by random I mean the use of using a random number table to go through the complaints, however they've been identified, so that you would choose them at random, so that there is no argument that they are incentivized to include complaints that were better handled or worse handled or whatever, but so that it isn't, there's random number tables you can get an app for.
So this may change your request, and I apologize. This purely falls on me. Thank you, Christy, for the reminder. So what we had planned to do is actually mail you a sample of some of those cases for your review, and then hopefully that will be able to satisfy what you're looking for. And that was the status update. And so in that, you'll have it, and then hoping in that time frame, we will have the person that's supposed to be over that area. Sorry.
So with permission, I would amend the motion to say, and that those complaints may be provided to the members of the committee in advance of the committee meeting or at the meeting as the Bureau determines.
I'm hearing you.
Okay. Sure. No problem. Thanks. Great. I wanted to follow up on Mr. Johnson's comments and just kind of get a better understanding of how that notification goes out to schools that there's going to be an announced inspection. Is the only, my question is it literally just something sent, by U.S. mail overnight, or are there, additional notification methods to include email and phone calls to try to give the best kind of good faith effort? I'm just curious as to how that process works.
Beth? Yes.
Okay, the way announced inspection works is our office tech contacts the school to make sure that they know that this notice is coming, because in the past, we don't want to just send a letter and have it returned in the mail and put time on the inspection. So once a person is made aware that we're going to come, we email that notification. Never in the history of ever have we been able to show up on the 7th day. We will then, with an announced, like I said, it takes by the inspector doesn't even have the file until the 7-day period is passed. The school knows that they're going to be inspected and knows the name of their inspector, but we're giving them that time to gather documents if they want to provide it, and then we email that notification.
So that sounds great. And there's not skip parts in that process, right? So the email doesn't go out until someone's been talked to on the phone, right?
Yes, and like I said prior is, sometimes when we call, there's no answer. So we have to do some research. Did the school move? Did the number change? So we may have to do some research, but we want to make contact so they, on an announce, they're aware. And then once the file goes to the inspector, 7 to 10 days after that notice went out, that's when the inspector starts their 4 to week-long process and then collaborates with the school. Now, we can't have the school saying, come in 6 months. But if it's reasonable amount of days that works for both sides, then we'll, of course, make that happen. So it's giving them notice to get somebody there. But it's typically probably from the time of the notice. I mean, we do send it out in mail also. It's probably a 3-week process before we're physically able to get to the announced inspection.
Understood. Oh.
And I think the point is, and also just to make sure it's clear, this is not to be like aha moment, like we got you. Like
Right.
we want to be able to say, hey, we're coming. These are some of the things that we're going to be looking at in addition to these things. And so we want it to be successful, right? And so that's the goal. It's not like we're trying to catch them doing something bad.
That's Dr. Marian. I appreciate that clarification. That was my concern. I wanted to make, you're right. The announced inspection should give an opportunity to put the best foot forward, and the unannounced inspection is unannounced.
Right, and the office technician also, when they notify the school, they also let them know of the schedule for our workshops. And we've had schools able to get into a workshop that's there, before their inspection if they hadn't already attended. So we want the school to know, because it makes it easier on both sides if they can fix things that they can fix. So.
Great, thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
There's a motion pending. And I think you probably need a new second since I added to or changed the language.
I'll second the amended motion.
Kevin, do you have a question?
Nope.
Do we need to vote on the motion, Mina, or is there any further discussion? Yeah.
You want, you want random within the various buckets. So you want to make sure that you see the non-substantiated, you want to see the non-jurisdictional, you want to see something in the consolidated, compliance obtained, insufficient. You also want to see something referred for citation. So it's not a pure random. You want to make sure that something's random inside the buckets.
Yes, thank you. I'll take that clarification.
And I believe your motion does include that there would be redactions for privacy concerns, and there wouldn't be disclosure of any investigatory specifics or tactics related to the cases.
Yes, any that are necessarily confidential. I mean, there may be steps that are not confidential, but I understand that there are things and tactics that are done that are confidential and would not be helpful to have disclosed publicly.
Any further discussion on this one? Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Geez, Mina. Any additional public comment before? Okay, no more public comment on this one? Okay, great. A vote on the motion made by my vice chair?
Aye.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to vote no because I think it's unnecessary considering the amount of detail we already get, but I'm outvoted anyway, so. Okay, we'll move on. Actually, it's 11:30, and do we want to take like a 10-minute bio break or discuss? Yes, yes, everyone's nodding, yes. Yes, please. Okay, so why don't we take, we'll take till 11:40, so 12 minutes, do your thing. Wait for Awad to take his seat. We can't get started until he's sitting. Okay, next up is the licensing report, which is item 5E. And there is Marina. Thank you, Marina.
Hello, everyone. I hope I can still say good morning. I think so.
And for
still
16
before
more
12.
minutes.
Okay. So I believe in the packet you were handed out, that you received today, I believe it's page 39 where it starts. It should say at the top, licensing application status as of January 1, 2019 for fiscal year 18-19. So that's where I'm going to start. So just a few things I'll point out on here. First, the first row at the top, the new full approval applications. You'll see that the under pending assignment, there are 12, which the majority of are incomplete applications. So that means we're waiting for additional documentation from the school to make it a complete application so we can process it. but most of those apps are incomplete apps. And then moving far to the right, the far right column, average days to approve, you'll see it's at 290 for the new full approval applications. And that is significantly down from our last meeting, which it was 321 days, so it's declined a bit there. Also, the renewal full applications, which is the third row down, you'll see that average days to approve for those is at 232, which is down from 294 at our last meeting that we reported. So I just wanted to point that out, that we're still making progress on reducing that timeline. The fourth row down, renewal accreditation, I just want to point out that under the column under review, you'll see 33 there with an asterisk, and the note below points out that 14 of those applications are pending a new term of accreditation, which means we have the application, we've reviewed it, there's no other deficiencies, we're just waiting for the accreditor to issue a new term of accreditation because we can't approve the application without that. So I just wanted to, we're going to keep reporting that number. We're tracking those applications separately because they don't have any other deficiencies. We're just waiting for that new term of accreditation. The other thing I'd like to point out is the verification of exemption applications. You'll see a very high number under received for fiscal year 18-19. As of Jan 1, we've received 228 verification of exemption applications, which is very, very high. And the reason for that is the law that went into effect 1/1/17 that basically puts a 2-year term cap on all verification exemptions. So after 2 years, the verification of exemption expires. Because that went into effect 1/1/17, the first day we started to see those applications expire was January 1st, 2019. And when the law went into effect, we notified the schools that had a verification of exemption to let them know this law was going into effect. So because of those verifications expiring 1/1/19, we received a lot of these applications from schools. And just to give you an idea, in October, we received 53. In November, we received 54. In December, we received 71. But in January, it did start to go down. So for January, we got, I think it was somewhere in the 30s, about 33 or 34. So it's already starting to decline a bit. I would anticipate it to kind of remain around there maybe for February and even into March, and then probably taper off a little bit. But because of this new law, we probably will be continuously or ongoing have a higher number of received verification exemption applications that we will be processing. So that's why under the column titled Total Pending, you'll see it says 271. That's why it's so high. Those verification of exemption applications was the main reason for that increase in total pending applications. But we're working through them, actually pretty timely. So I think we'll be able to clear through them in the next few months, and we'll have to see if that number continues to go down. And so that was one other thing I wanted to point out in the chart in the middle called Total Pending Applications by Date. There's a typo there. It says total pending applications on 1/1/19. It says 294, but that should be the 271 that I just pointed out. So I just wanted to make that correction. And just to give you an idea of the impact here, the total pending was continuing to decline before we received these verification exemptions. As of on November 1st, 2018, we only had 216 total pending apps. So as a lot of those verification exemptions started to come in, it's added to our total pending number. And that's all I was going to point out on this chart. If there's any questions on this chart before I move forward to the other ones. Okay. So the next chart is the 12-month new non-accredited application overview. So this is an overview of just these applications over the last 12 months, the number received, completed, and pending. I don't have much to point out here except that you'll see over the last 4 months, since September, even August, going back to August 2018, the numbers have remained pretty consistent. Received has remained pretty low. The number of pending is, pretty much remained around, 10, 12, even dipped below that a little bit. So not a whole lot of change there. I wasn't going to go over the next few charts in detail because they just provide more detail from the last 3 fiscal years of received, completed, and pending applications for this app type. So if you have any questions on any of those charts, please let me know. The idea was to, so you could see the difference of where we were at, certain points in the last few years compared to where we are now. But over the last, like I said before, 4 or 5 months, it's been pretty consistent. So not a whole lot of changes there. Well, if no questions on those charts, then I'm going to jump to the total number of schools by location type and approval type, which I believe in the packet you were handed out today is page 47. And so this is something we've been reporting on for most of the previous committee meetings. And this gives you an idea of the total locations by location type. That's the first row. So you have mains, branches, and satellites. So all of those combined is a total locations of 2014. And then the second row is of our approved institutions, the approval type, there are 4 approval types. Approval by means of accreditation, that's the ABMA. The non-accredited institution approval, which we refer to as the full approval, a conditional approval, and a provisional approval. And I've added below, just for your reference, what a conditional approval is and what a provisional approval is.
I have a question on that chart. Shall I wait till the end of her report, or do you want me to ask it now? Yes, I think I know the answer, but do you have the capability at this point to give us student populations for these different types of approvals, either from STRIF data or annual reports or something like that, or would it just be a huge manual task?
So my understanding, and Dr. Marian or Lisa can correct me, is that we don't have a great way of giving you an accurate number for that because of how schools, not only how schools report the annual report, but how that information is collected in the system we use. So as far as I know, we're not able to provide an accurate number for that.
I guess I was wondering with your new annual report system whether that might have changed things at all, but as far as you know, not.
I'm not sure. I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
I hope so, but I don't. Once again, it's because a lot of this information is self-reported. It makes it a little bit difficult.
Right, but if I guess I would be interested in that number if it could easily be pulled. I'm not interested in it if it's requiring a whole bunch of effort, which would take away from other things that need to be done. And the other question I have is, these are approval types, so I assume that schools that are only using the Bureau for complaint handling are not included here?
Correct.
And do you have numbers on that?
I don't in front of me, but we can certainly provide that.
That would be great,
Yeah.
if that's not too hard also.
So, same piece of paper here. You've got a mains of 1,093, and then you've got accredited of 442. Are those 442 all mains?
Yes, so of the mains, there are 442 that are approved by means of accreditation, 607 that are approved by, we call full or non-accredited institutional approval. But of course, under those mains, they have branches and satellites, and those branches and satellites still fall under that approval type. It's not a separate approval type for each branch or, each branch or satellite. It all falls under the main or the institutional approval.
Gotcha. Thank you.
The only other chart here was the next one, which because we've been reporting these numbers a few times now, I wanted to provide a little more trend analysis if that's something the committee is interested in, so you can see how these numbers change over time. And again, because we've only reported them a few times, this chart just reflects those 3 times we reported them, which was April 2018, October 2018, and then today at this meeting, February 19. So you can see not a major shift, but a little bit of shift since April. And then the chart below just lays out those numbers in a little more detail for you.
What does ABMA stand for? I'm just...
Approval by means of accreditation.
Okay.
You have that, Dave, so you should probably know what that is.
That's what it says in sale.
All right, thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. O'Connor before she departs? Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any public comment on the licensing report before we move on? Hearing none? Oh, you okay? You need some, here. Yours is empty. Have some more. You're welcome. Okay, so up next is the annual report update, 5F. We have Robert here in substitution for, well, he's now over these, so I guess not really substitution.
Guilty as charged. Hey, everyone. So I think last time we met, we had Jason from OIS kind of give you an overview of what was going on with the annual report system. Happy to report that the go-live date was January 3rd. And in the 10 days after the go-live date, we did some testing. We actually did some simulations. We had the analysts simulate them being a school, submitting information to kind of check for bugs and things like that. The portal, actually, the opening of the portal was announced on January 14th through an email blast and also posted on the website. The due date for the schools to provide their annual report is May 16th. As of a few days ago, the number of registered users was 404, and the number of institutions having an online submission in progress was 376. Total number of workflows of 1,697. And to kind of explain what a workflow is, if a school submits information on their main institution, that is a workflow. If they have additional programs, each of those programs is a workflow. So the system identifies everything by workflows. So we've gotten some great feedback so far. Some of the positive feedback is the reduction in the need to duplicate entries, because with the system, in prior years, the school had to re-enter information. So if they had a branch campus and a main campus and they both had the same programs, the school still had to manually enter the names and all the data for those programs. Now the system auto-populates from information that's entered for the main campuses. It's easier to navigate and enter data for the schools is what we're hearing. And one of the most important things is that they can save the data and go back to it at another time, where they couldn't do that in previous years. They had to get it all done and then submit it right then. Some of the challenges are duplicate submissions. So we do have some schools that are, instead of responding to the items that are missing or providing additional information, the system is identifying it as a new submission, like it's a new school. And so we're working on the back end with OIS to kind of fix that and eliminate those duplicate submissions, and then also to reach out to the schools and let them know what's happening. The school performance fact sheets have to be uploaded as a single document. I don't think schools understand that. Right now, they're trying to submit them individually. So what they have to do is scan them as a PDF file and then submit it as one file, all the school performance fact sheets. And then I know there was an issue identified with the financials. So the financial statements, as in previous years, still have to be submitted by mail outside of the annual report system. And then I know Marcus and his team have been getting quite a few calls since the portal opened. They've been fielding the calls. Most of the schools are just, they don't necessarily have issues, but they want to make sure they're doing it right before they press send. And so the calls, initially we had tons of calls, and I talked to Marcus this morning, and he said they've kind of dwindled down. So as folks are getting to know the system, they're receiving less calls. And that's kind of where we're at right now. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Robert. And I think you're just going to stay here for the, oh, should we do public comment? Is there, yeah, I was going to say maybe when Robert finishes, we can just, so why don't you go ahead and do the quality of education report, and we'll do public comment. when we're done.
Absolutely. So QEU's been very, very busy here as of late. I just want to kind of go over a couple of things that we've been doing. I have a team of 4 education specialists, actually senior education specialists, and I actually just lost one of our senior education specialists to a retirement. She decided to retire, do something else. So we have an open position for which we've been receiving applications already, and we're planning to interview in the near future. QEU reviews applicants' submissions. We help licensing, reviewing educational programs, reviewing applications. We've been assisting with the task force that you've heard about, where the quality of education is an issue or is involved. We have an increasing number of institutions that have been granted provisional approval to operate their degree programs, and so our unit is charged with tracking all of those institutions and their progress toward accreditation. And I'll talk about that in a minute. We've been acting as observers on accreditation visits, so the accreditors invite us to come out when they do their accreditation visits to some of our schools. We're just an observer, but we're able to interact with the accreditors and understand what they're looking at, really delve into their methods, their processes, procedures, standards, and all of that. And that's been very beneficial for us. We've also been representing the Bureau at quite a few hearings, informal and formal hearings. So I have chart attachment 5E, page 49. This is pretty consistent with what I've provided before. The top part shows the institutions that were approved to operate before January 1st, 2015. We're still tracking those schools toward achieving accreditation. Probably most notably is the bottom number in that section, 49 institutions currently in accreditation candidacy status. So we're just over the 18-month mark now, so my team has reached out to all the schools by letter, asking for an update on their accreditation status. Obviously, some of the schools are good about contacting us and keeping us informed anyway, so we already know where they're at. But we wanted to reach out to all 49 schools and get an idea for where they're at in their accreditation process. The second area down below that, those are all of the institutions that have received provisional approval to operate from us. And again, there are 50. And the status of the 50 is below that. There are 44 that are in total that are pursuing accreditation, and they are provisionally approved right now. So it keeps us pretty busy. And then I also added, as an additional note, I added for this particular meeting, the number of degree program suspensions that were issued since 2015.
Can you explain what that means, Robert?
Excuse me?
Degree program suspensions, does that mean the school remains open, but you've suspended their ability to offer the
That's
degrees?
correct, yeah. Provisional approval is the approval is for degree programs. So if the institution doesn't become accredited, they don't meet their benchmarks, there's a chance that they can their programs can be suspended, degree programs.
You mentioned that you were attending hearings. Are those hearings on whether or not they should have their degree program suspended?
That's correct.
Just more of a comment. I want to say I'm really happy to hear that you've got folks on observer status with accreditation visits. I had a chance to do that with WASC, and it was like an amazing opportunity. I think there's no better way to understand how that process works than to be there over that multi-day on campus, talk to everyone experience. That's great.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Robert? All right, great. Thank you, Robert. If there's any public comment on the, there's one more. The IT system.
I'm here for a while.
You're a Renaissance man, Robert. Okay, go ahead and we'll do item H before we do public comment.
All right. So business modernization project, I think last time we spoke, We had just kicked off, or we're getting ready to kick off stage 2 with California Department of Technology. And so we had that kickoff in September. We had a request for information, an RFI that went out from California Department of Technology on October 16th with a November 6th due date. We received responses from 13 vendors. Some of those vendors we had already received information from and had actually had them come to the Bureau and give us some demos on their system. So we felt like we were a little ahead of the game there. So BPP staff and OIS staff reviewed all the information that we received from all the vendors. We looked at what they offer, what their capabilities are, concluded our market research in a report called the Project Approval Lifecycle Stage 2 package. That package went to the DCA director and the agency director. Both approved it, and it is sitting with California Department of Technology right now for final approval. And we don't expect it not to be approved, but you never know. So the next step is for BPP and OIS to kind of work together. When we kick off phase 3, that's where the rubber hits the road. And we'll start to prepare formal solicitations for software procurement, systems integration, consulting, and some other smaller contracts in support of moving us to a new system. We're super excited about it.
Can I ask you a question about that part now? Or wait? A couple of questions. What is does the Bureau or the department have a sense of what this putting this IT system in place is going to cost? And remind us again of what the expected date for that to be up and running is.
I don't want to guess. We have an idea because we're actually working with a few other boards and bureau within DCA, which maybe will allow us to get a lower cost.
A range.
1 million to 20 million.
Just one paycheck difference.
Yeah, I would rather not right now, and we can maybe have budgets give that information next time.
And again, the up and running date approximately expected?
I think initially we were looking at, 2022? But it really depends, in talking with the OIS folks, it really depends on the vendor we end up going with and basically how quickly things can happen. The process, and hopefully I'll explain it right, the process we'll be using is different than probably what we've done in the past or what organizations have done in the past, where we'll propose something, give it to the vendor, and then they'll kind of implement it, make it happen, and then come back to us and say, is this what you want? Where it's more of a fluid system where we both work together and we're both in there at the same time. The BPP folks and the folks that are building the software are working together in real time to get it done. So hopefully it's going to go a little bit quicker than that. That's our hope anyway, and maybe by next meeting I can share additional information.
Yeah, the goal is 2021.
And the other question I have, just so I understand a little bit better, in the past the idea was to have a system that worked across all departments and boards, and that fell apart. And so this system, what BPPE puts in place, will not necessarily be able to talk to a system at the nursing board or things like that, correct?
So,
it's just really it'll work within the Bureau.
So that's why I think we, in partnership with 3 other boards and bureaus, are going to be kind of the leader in hopefully merging people to want to come onto this new system that we're coming up with. So that's the hope.
What are the other boards and bureaus that you're working with?
I can't remember which ones right off my top of my head right now.
Are they some of the same ones that you have MOUs with right now?
Great question. I can't remember.
All right. Any other questions for Robert? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bales. Any public comment on items F, G, or H, annual reports, quality of education, or IT system? Robert's like, you don't, Robert and Robert approach the bench.
Why don't you sit, you should sit closer, Robert.
Did you guys just tag in? That was,
Oh, yeah.
that was impressive.
Okay, so
Just technical question. August 1st, Bureau sent out a thing saying the portal would be good for financial reports. So that email's kind of floating around out there. I think I just heard Bob say, and I could be wrong, that basically the financials have to be mailed in. They cannot go through the portal this year? Or not ready for that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so maybe another email that would go out, say like, hey, just want to make, we thought we'd have this by the portal by now, but let's see if we can just email it or mail it this year, and then next year maybe we can email it or something like that. So that'd be great.
I appreciate the comment, and Marcus is actually working on a letter right now to go out, in addition to the emails, to make sure that everyone gets the letter and
that'd be good.
Portal's open and issues, challenges, and that will be one of them.
Well, I know your email went around, so it was obviously working. So good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump in real quick. Robert, over here.
Oh, where's that voice coming from?
Who's talking to me?
Part of the requirements is that the financials are mailed in, and that's, I believe, in either statute or regulation, I'm not sure, but it's part of the requirement that they're mailed in.
We won't get into what I think is overregulation by some of the Bureau staff. That's another conversation for another day.
Thank you, Roberts. Anyone else for public comment on those items? Okay, great. Next up, a report on from OSAR. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Scott Valverde from the Office of Student Assistance and Relief, and I'm happy to give you an update today, starting with the page 53 exhibit in your packet. In fact, that's the only handout I'll be speaking to today, as Deputy Chief Rifredi will be providing the update on the Student Tuition Recovery Fund. So 53 through 56 is my first item, which is an update on the summary of activities report for OSAR. And I would like to first explain kind of what the document is, and then give a couple highlighted numbers that I think are of note, and then open it up to any questions that you might have before we move on to the second item, which will be Brightwood. So what you're looking at is a summary of the quarterly reports that we are required by statute. We're required by statute to post beginning with the quarter that began July 1, 2017 through September 1st, 2018. So in effect, this is again a summary of the reports that we've provided to you in previous meetings. And statute also established this report was required to be posted by January 1, 2019, and we met that mandate. It's currently on our website as well. So what I kind of wanted to highlight are kind of what this is, and also a few things that are excluded from this report just based on timelines. So Chart A identifies the closed school in-person workshops that were conducted by OSAR between the first one that happened since we came into existence on July 1, which was November 14, 2017 through July 30th, 2018. We conducted 11 such workshops. So what this excludes in terms of what we've done to date, of course, are two large closures that happened after this report was posted, which of course are the Art Institute and Argosy University branch closures, and the Brightwood closure that I'll provide an update on in my next item. It also excludes closed school outreach that we provide in forms other than in-person workshops as well. We do quite a bit of work for school closures that don't necessarily result in an in-person workshop or are in concert with in-person workshops, speaking specifically to phone calls, emails, conference calls. We often, when we find out a school is closing, we'll make an assessment as to whether an in-person workshop is in fact the most effective way to provide that outreach. So this is a portion, but not all of the work that we've done on the closed school side.
Chart B is what we call internally our proactive outreach, other outreach and educational activities in the form of tables at college fairs, presentations at other workshops where we've been invited. For a lot of work, as you can see, in partnership with the California Department of Veteran Affairs in the CalTAP program, which is also going to be expanding as well. Other college fairs that are based around specific demographic populations or other clusters, if you will, like the NACAC college fairs. So we conducted 11 closed school workshops and 28 proactive workshops in the time period covered in this report for a total of 39 events. So that also, again, predates, in addition to the closed school outreach predating Art Institute and Brightwood, the proactive outreach predates our workshop that we put on ourselves, and we're planning on doing more of those in the future. And again, as I mentioned, the expansion of the CalTAP workshops and other opportunities that we are currently exploring. A couple of numbers that I wanted to draw your attention to in chart C and D. Chart C is the number of students served. That's a number we're pretty proud of, which is the 7,446 students served, basically in a little over our first year of existence, really in our first year of existence as we were staffing up in that first 3 months or so. So, and those are unique student contacts, so there may be some, but I would say minor duplication in terms of if we met with a student at either multiple events or in multiple ways, such as helping them complete a STRIF application as well as working with them at a workshop. I would say that number is also impressive as on its own, but also represents not the full number, as well as these are data elements that we have with a specific tracking strategy and data logs and that we need to be able to account for as well. So we often are at events with sign-in sheets where not every student in attendance signs in. So my gut tells me it's probably closer to about 10,000. Let's see. So in terms of assistance that we have provided in OSAR that led to the Bureau eventually approving STRIF claims, as you can see, we separated the data by claims and workload that was assumed when OSAR came into existence on July 1 versus claims that came in after OSAR came into existence and implemented our procedures. So we had 133 claims that were eventually approved by the Bureau with the assistance of OSAR during the time period covered. That's about halfway down on the page 55, if you're following with me. You can also see that if you go down to the bottom of the second chart under D, bottom of page 55, I'm sorry, you can see that a very high percentage of the reported student services, reported number of students served at the top of the chart, the 7,400, 6,100 of those were related to assistance with STRIF claims. So a very high percentage of our work is with assisting students accessing the state reimbursement program. Does that make sense? Any other questions on the handout? Or any questions at all?
I have a question about in chart D,
Sure.
the appealed claims. So in the right-hand columns, it says that the total number is 6. But I'm a little confused because the claims on appeal.
That the numbers under each month were the number as of that month.
Oh, I see.
So it's not a rolling total.
Okay, got it. I have another question.
Sure.
So I know you've been doing a lot of outreach more recently to Corinthian students who
Yes.
might be eligible for closed school relief.
We have.
I've had a number of students who have indicated that they've received the communications from OSAR. They may not be eligible for closed school, but they may be eligible for STRIF relief based on the California Attorney General's judgment.
Exactly.
I'm just curious if students are coming to you thinking that they're eligible for the closed school relief communication, if you would then, figure out that they might be eligible under STRIF for some other reason, and then would help them with that?
That's exactly what we're doing.
Okay.
It's a timely question, Megumi. It's happening in real time, so it's okay to speak to this, right? It wasn't on the agenda, but just wanted to make sure.
It's part of your outreach report, what services you provide, so I do believe it's within the scope of the agenda.
Okay, just double checking. Yes, so to Megumi's point, we are doing more. I've reported in the past about outreach that we're providing to prior students of the Corinthian colleges as it relates to their possible eligibility for a STRIF or a federal loan discharge or other relief programs that we may be able to assist them with in terms of information. And we've recently put out sort of what I'm calling phase 2 of our outreach campaign with quite a bit more numbers as well. And so we are getting a lot of calls back, a lot of responses to that. The campaign basically was defined as emails and phone calls to additional rosters that we received recently. And as well as a landing page on our website with some information as well. And basically just our staff's case management on those individual calls, which is quite common. What we're seeing are students that were not aware of the state relief program, but were only aware of the loan discharge program. And so we're making them aware of their possible eligibility for STRIF, and if nothing else, to work with them to look at those eligibility requirements and to submit a claim if possible. So that's, again, not reflective in this data or the data that Lisa is going to be providing, because it just we just pushed that out the last week of January. So, but we are already getting claims. We're getting a lot of calls and a lot of emails. So that's encouraging. But in that specific scenario you mentioned, yes, we would not just close the door because you're not eligible for the closed school discharge program. We would explore STRIF or anything else.
Question? I have a question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
This is going through August, right? This is
correct.
The stuff we have. What's the trend for September, October, November? Yeah.
I would say the trend is that we had the 2 largest closures pretty much by any quantifiable measure since OSAR came online happened after the data that's compiled in this report, which are the Art Institute, Argosy University branch closures, and the ECA closures that I'm going to report on next. And so the trend has been a lot more calls, a lot more workshops, and a lot more incoming STRIF claims as a result of those closures. On the outreach side, I would say we're pretty much holding steady in terms of the amount of events that we're conducting or partnering with.
Okay, it would have been nice to have had past August on here. And I know it's a lot of work, but
the Lisa's report will go through January 18th, I believe, on the STRIF side. And then on the outreach side, the next item is Brightwood. I'm going to talk extensively about that.
Okay.
I had a question. On the outreach workshops that you do, in what circumstances are those done with other agencies that are doing outreach, such as community colleges or the state universities?
The question again was, how do they come together? Was that?
No, when you're in about how often is it when you're doing a student workshop that you're doing it just BPPE is there versus when it comes together with other public schools in California?
Sure. Just giving a little heads up to my presentation on Brightwood, the Brightwood workshops, we had quite a few community colleges and other state agencies that, and the U.S. Department of Education that participated as well. So on the closed school workshops, it's really dependent on the profile of the school, whether they had Title 38 funding, whether they had federal financial aid, et cetera, and whether a community college. We always reach out to the community colleges and all of our partners prior to every workshop, and then it's just a matter of whether or not the participation is helpful to students often or whether they're able to join us. On the proactive side, it's, I would say, a very high percentage of these are represented, either the community colleges and or CSU are there with us as well. In all the veterans workshops, the CalTAP workshops, there's always whatever the most local community college is to that particular military installation. They're always invited and commonly present as well, as of course, as well as the Department of Veteran Affairs. And then individual CSUs participate or the CalVet presenters present on CSU and community colleges as well. So there's a pretty thorough overview of the different segments of higher ed in all of those workshops. In the college fairs, well, the college fairs themselves are generally a pretty representative of both for-profits as CSUs and community colleges as well as us.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, on to Brightwood. So I guess we don't have to call them the anonymous school anymore, this part of the agenda. Okay, so OSAR's role and participation in the ECA closures was as such. So we did receive a roster or accumulation of several campus rosters totaling about 2,800 students that would be impacted by the impending closures on December 5th, 2018, identifying that all 11 ECA campuses, 10 Brightwood colleges, and 1 Golf Academy of America would be closing as early as December 7th, which is a 48-hour window, as I think Dr. Marian mentioned earlier. 7 of the 11 closing campuses were scheduled to close on December 7th. The other 4 campuses closed the following week. So that was our turnaround time and what we were provided with. We were also provided with, based on conference calls that we had with their representation prior to the workshops, a site liaison at each of the 11 campuses, as well as a discussion about the students' ability to access their records, transcripts, and financial records, both on-site during the workshops or electronically as they provided them to the Bureau. OSAR contacted, or at least attempted to contact, all 2,800 students on those rosters via emails and phone calls, as well as social media postings as well. We also, as I mentioned, contacted all of the statutory partners, the U.S. Department of Education, California Student Aid Commission, the California Community Colleges, and the California State Approving Authority for Veterans Education, because they did have Title 38 funding as well. At almost, but not quite all of the 11 workshops, we had partner participation. At all the larger campuses, we had a U.S. Department of Education rep who co-presented with us on the loan discharge programs and process. It was very, very valuable having DOE there. It was extremely helpful. Also, to the school's credit, there was at least one, in some cases more than one, student representative at each of the workshops, including the workshop that was held off-site in one case, and in a couple of cases where we got out there after the school had actually closed, although in most of the 11 we were there on the closure date or prior. So it was very effective in that sense, in that the DOE resource was there, the CalVet resource was there for the Title 38 funded students, and the school representatives were there to make copies and or give original copies of their transcript and financial records. We also conducted one additional workshop that was put on by the San Diego Community College District for Brightwood students who invited us to participate. And we also have one more scheduled as well. So in our wraparound services, following back up with students who attended the workshops or who were unable to attend the workshops, we sort of did an assessment of need and have decided that
quite a few students in the greater San Diego area wanted to attend but could not attend any of the 4 workshops that we did in that area. And so we'll be offering an additional workshop February 23rd, and are continuing to assess the need in other geographic areas as well. In the 12 workshops that we conducted, participated in, the 11 that we conducted, and the 1 partner workshop, we've met with over 750 students in person and many more since as well, both in phone calls or one-on-one meetings, et cetera, resulting in, to date, and this was as of last night, I asked staff to compile the numbers. We've received 201 STRIF claims from ECA students to date that have been logged in. There are certainly more that are in baskets that are stacked pretty high. So also the last point, Dr. Marian mentioned this earlier as well. Dr. Marian and I each attended and presented at the Board of Vocational Nursing and the Board of Registered Nursing Education and Licensing Subcommittee to speak to agendized items they had on teach-out agreements for the nursing students who are impacted by these closures in the San Diego area, where another institution has proposed to come in and do a teach-out agreement. And we spoke to the general transfer and teach-out process and the Bureau's vetting process and OSAR's role. And in both cases, both boards entered a motion and voted to approve conditionally both teach-out plans. So that will help mitigate a lot of the nursing students that were impacted by this closure specifically. So
I don't know if anybody ever experienced a teach out before. I'm sure a few of us have. I taught out at university prior to coming into this role, but also being able to be there with the students and see what they're going through. I can't tell you the level of angst and frustration and irritation students had, but after the presentations that Scott and I gave at both BVNT and BRN, there were students that were coming up crying, giving us hugs, and really thanking us for the work that OSAR had done on their outreach and informing people. And I just think it's important. Once again, I think often the Bureau is in a space where it gets beat up often, but I think we need to highlight some of these amazing, feats that they do. And Scott and his team did a wonderful job. And just not Scott and his team, the Bureau-wide did a wonderful job, because within that 48 hours, just the staffing level within OSAR wasn't enough. We had to pull staff from other units within the Bureau to go out to these institutions and have conversations and support our consumers of this state. And so I just want you to all know that we're doing great work within the Bureau, and we will continue to get better.
Questions?
You partner with a lot of schools.
Yes.
For a lot of this. Do you include private schools in your partnerships, or is it only the community colleges?
No, and as I mentioned, there were 2 prime examples of private post-secondary institutions that stepped in to propose to do teach-outs for the nursing students. So it was not limited to the public schools. And often, in addition to those, we also had a few instances where the other private post-secondary institutions came to the workshops as well and set up tables to provide information to students. The partnerships I mentioned.
The people you invite,
Yeah.
do you invite? I mean, I'm kind of familiar with this. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a big deal. Everybody knows. I mean, just when you invite the community colleges, do you ever invite?
We did, yeah.
as
And
well?
yes, I'm sorry.
Do you, I'm sorry. Do you also invite legal aid services to participate in these workshops, both the general sort and the closed school ones?
I can't recall a situation where we've specifically invited them to come and present, but they're often one of the referrals that we provide to students when we're meeting with them one-on-one. And we, I can't think of any reason why we couldn't do that in the future. Often, as we've talked about, the timelines are extremely tight, and I've got a lot of logistical moving parts, and we do have within our statute a very specific provision about specific partners, and I've got a group email list, and I've sort of created sort of a relationship with them. So at minimum, I'll send the workshop information to them, but in an orderly closure, where we've got 30 days as the regulations
establishes the requirement, and we do a lot of stuff. We research other schools in the area that have similar programs, have pretty in-depth conversations with students before we ever go out and do the workshop. And I'm open to bringing in whatever partner fits the needs of that particular population of a specific closure. I apologize. When I talk about partners, I'm sometimes I should clarify. I'm talking about the statutory partners. That's sort of like one cohort, a group that I work with, given the fact that they are called out specifically in our statute. But I always consider that included, but not limited to, and looking for other partners. The other partner that I did not mention that we have is with the workforce development system within California as well. Many of these students were funded by third-party workforce development local agencies, and we've worked with them. I have a meeting coming up with them actually next week with SETA on Brightwood students that were impacted, and to work collaboratively with them. So I'm open to bringing in the partners that would be most helpful to students.
So if a legal aid organization they just need to contact you and say,
the best
put
way
us
to
on
do
your
it.
list.
Yeah. Yep.
So it seems like you're providing incredibly useful information in these sessions that you're having with students. And just in the spirit of always thinking about how we can reach more students.
Of course.
It seems like, a lot of people are sort of limited in sort of physically being able to be present at these sessions. And so I'm just wondering if you've thought of potentially doing like live webinars or something where people can attend virtually, so that you can reach even more people.
Webinars, I think, are definitely the next step on the horizon. To answer your question, what we've done to date have been conference calls or individual calls for students who aren't able to attend one of our workshops, or, as I mentioned in this particular case, to go back out and do another one where we specifically take in information from students who weren't able to be there, and if it was due to scheduling issues, work around that so that we can capture as many as possible. But next on my hit list would be, to explore technology. Matter of fact, I know the Bureau is looking at that in other ways as well in terms of expanding our communication capability. And it would definitely apply in this case, but to date, it's been conference calls, and they're not rare. We actually have one scheduled for next week for a school that recently closed, where it's a small group, and it was a lot of online students, and so they were dispersed pretty significantly geographically, so we're going to be doing it via the phone. And then we have the STRIF video that we provided prior as well. That's another really good tool in that area. But a webinar platform would be great.
I'm looking at the org chart, and how many people work on the STRIF?
Currently, all staff in OSAR minus myself, staff manager, and the office technician have some percentage of assistance with STRIF in their duty statement. Two positions, it's 75% of their time. The other positions, it's 25% or less.
So it's more than just the STRIF
Yes.
unit where there's one person and a vacant.
Yep.
Thank you.
I think that's a good segue to Lisa's item, which is next on the list.
Great. Any questions for Scott before Lisa gets started? Okay. Thank you, Scott.
Okay, the next item is going to be on page 51 of the handout from today. It's attachment 5F, and it's titled the Student Tuition Recovery Fund Claims. This is just an update on the claims that we've received so far this fiscal year is 262 claims. We have closed out 70 claims, issuing refunds in the amount of $485,000 to those students. Currently, we have 395 claims that are going through, as Scott said, the outreach that OSAR provides to the students in helping them complete their claims. And there's 207 that are being set up for recommendations. And we have about 31 claims that are over at the State Controller's office pending payment. and 106 claims that are in the queue to be evaluated and some outreach done on those claims. And our current fund balance is just a little over 26 million. Any questions on that document?
Do you have the dollars associated with the 207 in the recommendation pending?
I do not.
Or the 31 that's at the state controller's office?
I do not, but we can include that in our next statistical reporting for you if you'd like.
I'd like it.
So noted.
You don't have to do it.
On the next document is the Student Tuition Recovery Fund claims, the large impact closures. And as you can see, all claims received this fiscal year, the 262, and of those, how many of them were considered the high impact schools, ITT, Heald, Wyotek, and Everest, and then the amount of the claims associated with those. And I'm open for any questions you may have.
And I know this isn't your document, but I'm looking at the bottom of page 55 in today's documents where it says pending claims, total dollar amount, and it's 5.6 million. And that's the 395 that must match up to the active waiting for student response or something like
I think
that.
those were from OSAR with the ending date of the end of October. Oh, I'm sorry, end of August, from the mandatory reporting that he did. So the current numbers would be different than that, and I can get them for our next meeting.
Okay, we'll just do next. Just trying to figure out if, we got a big balance, 26 million. How much goes in every year? Or what are we at?
So right now, there's zero collection. However, if you look at, 26 million, the interest that's being made on that continues to go into there. So even though we're paying claims, it's still creating money.
Okay.
I have a question on, I think it's 62 in the packet tip from today and 44 from the one that was sent out. At the lower chart on that page, I'm assuming that strict claims in progress, ineligible, denied, and paid should total the same number as strict claims received, but it doesn't. So what am I doing wrong?
Because the strict claims received are the ones that were received during the fiscal year. So there could have been other claims still pending from the prior fiscal year that are in this chart.
So the chart on top is 18-19. The chart on the bottom is all impacted students from those campuses since they closed.
Correct.
But if it's all since they closed, the total number of strict claims received, 288, then the other column should total that if it includes everything.
No, that's only what has been in those specific categories that have been dealt with during that fiscal year. They could have, in the 288, could have been received in the prior fiscal year and dealt with. So it
says for school closure.
The bottom is the total impact from the school closure. The top is just dealing with where we're at in this fiscal year.
I'm just looking at the bottom chart.
Okay.
So it says that from school closure to current. So why, I guess I don't understand why those other four columns saying how they were handled wouldn't total up to 288 in that lower chart there on the first school, for example. In other words, shouldn't they all be one of those four things?
Not the dollars. She's talking about strict claims received, 288.
Oh, got
Then
you.
you've got in progress, ineligible, denied, paid. That should add up to 288.
I'll have to look into that for you.
Okay. Well, at least it's not my math.
So this is this through the top half, July through January or July through December?
July through January.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You have a gut feel for what the next 5 months are going to, I mean, just, is it about the same trend? Is there a big bubble?
We haven't really seen a change in the trend over the last couple years. It just totally depends, again, on the school closures and the impact of those school closures. And with the outreach that OSAR is doing with the Corinthian schools, we do anticipate to see that increase a little bit, but it's still pretty early.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I have two more questions. I think this is where it should come in. One is, I am still mystified that the numbers for strict claims, especially from these big impact schools, is so low. And at some point, if you folks have any insights as to what's going on there, you know, at a future meeting to share with us, that would be great. You may not, but
I think we do our due diligence of reaching out to the students and providing them with whatever assistance we can to help them understand what the Student Tuition Recovery Fund is and how to apply for it and so forth. As far as understanding why they're not applying for it, maybe a follow-up that we can do with reaching out to the students.
Yeah. And again, you have lots on your plate, but it just seems so odd to me that there's, you know, tens of thousands probably, and we're getting a few hundred. Now, you know, some of them may be going on to another school. There may be a lot of reasons, but I think it would be helpful
Almost
to
all the
understand.
loans are being discharged. I mean, they're just not.
Well, and then the other question, which that leads into, is when you have here claims that are pending, if it's possible, and again, without a ton of manual work to do it, I would be interested to see what percentage of those are awaiting federal determination on, you know, closed school or false cert, and that your payment of the claim, you're waiting to see if they get federal money.
So if we have a claim that shows that the student paid cash above what their loans paid for, we don't wait for the loans to be discharged. We'll issue the refund for the amount that we know that they're eligible for at that point. And then if their loan is not discharged, then they'll let us know they denied it, and then we'll reopen it. So we're not holding.
So they don't show up as pending then?
Correct.
Okay. And I guess the related question to that is, my concern is that because the feds have been dragging their feet for so long, we may have people who, you know, their school closed in 2017, and they can't get new student loans, and they can't go to school until they get some money. And if they're not being paid here and they're not being paid there, it's like years of their life that they're sort of stymied.
The feds are not dragging their feet. It happens very quickly. I mean, if they go to apply at another school, you know, that financial aid department is doing a lot of work to try to fix it if it hasn't already been fixed. It doesn't take that long. I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. That's the information I'm hearing. I don't know personally, but that's the information I'm getting. That, for example, the closed first time, the feds were not processing any of those claims from.
Maybe the first time they weren't good at it yet, but they've
I
gotten
thought there was
good.
just a recent lawsuit that sort of forced them to start doing that again.
I think that was borrower defense to repayment, not closed school discharge.
Right. Well, whatever the case.
Yeah.
You know.
I think the closed school discharges are much less cumbersome and get done a lot quicker. The borrower defense claims, then they have, you know, the student is obligated to provide some, you know, evidence of how it was a fraud. And, you know, with the closed school, it's like, oh, the school closed and you're enrolled, here's your money.
Right.
So yeah, it does. But you're right. The borrower defense claims are taking a really long
Those
time.
are the ones, yeah. I'm sorry, yeah, those are the ones where they
There
just
was the
halted.
lawsuit and the whole thing. Yep.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I don't know that we have any answer at this point, but it's a concern, I think, that our system is set up or being handled in a way that you can't get reimbursement from the feds and go ahead and pay the students now so they can get on with their lives. And I don't know what you can say about it, but just a concern that I think we should be all thinking about, whether there's something that needs to be changed in either in our system or maybe we can't. Maybe it's just the federal system.
In regards to the vast majority of students that would be eligible were impacted by these school closures didn't have substantial amounts of cash outlay, their loan balances, and so there's no reimbursement to be done there's a question of when that loan is discharged, right? And so it may impede their future ability to secure loans if they're hung up in that process. But they didn't pay any money to be reimbursed, or they're relatively modest figures, as is reflected in what the STRIF
Right,
claims
right,
are
no, I
paid.
understand that.
Yeah.
But I'm just concerned that they're entitled to get back the money here, but we're holding it up.
Well, there isn't any money to get
If-
back, though.
No.
They didn't pay any money, so
No,
there's
no,
none to come
They
back.
have a right to get their loans discharged or canceled or paid off by the STRIF fund. And if the STRIF fund is, the way that I understand it, is waiting to see if they get their loan discharged. But in the meantime, the student has this huge debt on student loans that prevents them from moving forward with their life. That's my concern. And then, it may or may not be discharged by the feds, but might or might not fit under our STRIF, even though the feds don't discharge it or do discharge it. So, as
I
I
think
say,
what Lisa is saying is that if a student applies for STRIF and they have federal student loans, they apply for closed school discharge, and I'll just throw a fake number out. So they had $5,000 in student loans and $1,000 in cash payments to the school. So they apply for STRIF, and the bureau is looking at that application saying, okay, you're going to apply for closed school discharge for this $5,000. We can process a claim for the $1,000. And then if you don't get this $5,000 discharged, come back to us, and maybe there's a way that we can refund you that $5,000 instead of the department, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I will say this, because obviously I deal with the schools all the time. The closed school discharges are, from what I've seen at least, are being paid out pretty consistently and aren't taking a lot of time,
I'm sorry,
which is good.
I should have mentioned borrower defense.
Yeah, so
that's the main issue.
Well, here's the thing. If you're enrolled in a school that closes, you don't need to use borrower defense claim. You could just use closed school discharge. The borrower defense claim is, you're not going to double up. You either get one or the other. And if you're enrolled and the school closes, you're eligible for closed school discharge regardless of borrower defense claim. Where the borrower defense claim comes in is if you were, let's say you dropped out 6 months before and you're not in that 120-day window or whatever. So there are lots of students that have made claims. And if you look at like the master promissory note, that's not what I meant. The master person that was running the borrower defense thing as they were going through it, is that there were a lot of students that were confused and were applying for borrower defense when they were actually eligible for closed school discharge. So they were moving that around, and I think they're sort of starting to get that together, but there's still a ton of borrower defense claims because of the just screwy way that they set it up. But I think for most of the schools that we're dealing with under STRIF, the students, it's basically built around a closed school. So if the students they have federal loans, they can just apply for the discharge, and that gets done pretty quickly. So, but it's great that you guys are not waiting for that to happen. I thought that you were actually waiting first. But if you can refund some portion and then do the rest, then that, I think, at least gives them something.
Right, and definitely looking at trying to get the money back in the student's pocket to make them whole as much as we can, as soon as we can.
Right. Okay, any other questions about STRIF?
Sorry, I just, going back to an earlier point that was made about trying to get more information from students about why they might not be applying. I know that the communications that are going out to students have a link to a survey for OSAR. So if that information isn't being collected in the survey, I'm wondering if that might be a good place to try to collect that information.
Thank you. Thanks. I believe that there is something in there regarding that. Yeah, some open text boxes, so we can look at those results.
All right.
One other question. I thought I saw it on here, but now I'm not seeing it. We had requested an analysis of OSAR's role under the statute, and I thought I saw something in here. It's next. Okay. Thank you. I lost it.
All right, so it's 12:53. Are we okay skipping lunch? Are you guys going to be okay if we just power through? All right, I need a bio break, so it's 12:53. You want to come back at 1, or do you guys want a few extra minutes to grab a
How much
granola bar?
time do you
or
think we're still going to go for?
Maybe another hour?
All right.
No? Michael says no.
I'll fly through. My part is just real quick. It's just a quick update. And so the only thing I think is may take a few minutes is going to be the ISAs.
Okay, so an hour or less. So if everybody is okay, we'll just take 10 minutes and then we can come back and finish up. Good? Okay. So 5 after 1. So moving on, next up on the agenda is item 6, status updates relating to the regulatory packages. So I assume Kent's coming up on that one.
Before we go there, I just want to report to Ms. Ryder and the committee. I'm sorry I was not able to complete my analysis in time for the meeting, but I will definitely have it for our next meeting. It's a workload issue, so I apologize.
Thank you. All right. Item 6.
So just a quick update as far as regulations. Kent is here on his way. All right, so just real quick, our out-of-state, so item A, out-of-state regular. The final rulemaking file has been submitted to OAL to be approved. However, all the sections of the packet, the other parts of the packet have already been submitted. So we're in good standing with that. Item B, English language programs. The notice package has been approved by the department, and agency just reviewed it, and we're actually looking at it. They just sent it back to us, and we're doing some edits to that. Agenda item C, verification of exempt status. It has been submitted for the normal process of department. Agency will approve it before it goes into noticing with OAL. Agenda item D, compliance with laws and policy. Noticing packages has been submitted for review and edited by council. Once completed, the package will be submitted to the department and agency for their review before noticing. Item E, student records. The notice package is still being developed at this point in time, but once it is, it will be submitted for review and edits by council, then to department and agency, then we'll go to OAL before noticing. And then last one, item F, required notice and teach out. The package is being redeveloped right now, and we're looking at tweaking it and updating some of the language to it. Kent, how did I do?
Very well.
All right.
Any questions?
Thanks for stopping by, Kent.
Talk a little bit about the student records. When a school closes,
yeah,
maybe there is a way, and some discussion a little bit earlier is that some of the strip fund could be used to house the records.
Future agenda item, because this is just a status.
That's coming up on
update.
number 8. Don't let me forget.
So, yeah.
I'm going to write it down, David.
I have one quick question. In regards to thank you for the handy table that shows where things are at in terms of progress. Where here do we have the opportunity to opine? I know that I recognize from previous meetings we get a copy of the language. Is it in the pre-approved stage or is it in the department stage?
Yeah, it's in the pre-approved stage. Anything that this is a status update on language we've already brought.
Right.
Once the language is approved, then I have to build out the package that the APA requires and then get the proper approvals.
Thank you.
And then after it's noticed, there's always an opportunity to opine as well.
Thank you, Michael. That was very good. And Kent, you're invaluable addition to Michael's report. Any questions before Ken escapes? No? Okay. Any public comment regarding the regulatory package? Gone. Okay. So that concludes item 6. Maybe we will get done in less than an hour. You weren't joking around. The last item is the Office of Counsel's analysis on ISA agreements. I guess that would be redundant. IS agreements.
So I put my memo in everyone's packet. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it. I'm sorry, I just got it to you this morning, but what I wanted to do is give kind of a summary of what it contains, and then we could have some discussion today, but if you want to go and after the meeting read the memo and put it back on the agenda, I think Dr. Marian would be open for that as well. So the advisory committee and members had asked for an analysis of ISAs in light of the Bureau's current regulations and laws. And my understanding of ISAs is no one type of ISA. There's no one model, but generally ISAs are a type of tuition model where in exchange for current educational services, students agree to pay a percentage of their future income. And that future income, obviously, when they start the program, the educational program, is undetermined. I understand there's usually a fixed percentage rate that is applied. So if a student makes more after graduation, they maybe would be making more than originally borrowed or loaned. And if they make less, they may ultimately pay less than what was put forth as an investment or a loan. And it's not clear whether it's called an investment or a loan. But that's the general background of ISAs. I know there was some presentation earlier to the committee about what ISAs are. So the Bureau's laws do not expressly speak to ISAs, and on a national level, it's been noted that it's kind of a gray area of the law. There's no major regulators that have specifically addressed regulations to deal with ISAs. However, the Bureau's laws do contain various provisions that are of a concern because of basically grouped into two categories, which there's 7 items in my memo, but broadly can be grouped into 2 categories. And the first is that the Bureau's laws show a legislative intent that before a student enters an educational program or signs an enrollment agreement, that the total charges for the educational program are disclosed. And so total charges are defined in the Bureau's laws to mean those charges, costs paid to the institution directly or paid to another entity but required for the educational program. So total charges have to be disclosed to the student before they sign the enrollment agreement. They must be in the enrollment agreement. They must be in the catalog that the student has to get before they sign the enrollment agreement. They also have to be in the school performance fact sheets. And there's also a category that says where institutions, there's regulations that say where institutions provide loans to students, they must comply with the Truth in Lending Act. And though that area of the law is very specific about requiring financial disclosures on credits and including the total repayment over the life of the loan. So it's questionable whether where you have an amount for the educational program that is not determined or is not predetermined when the student starts, whether all of those disclosure requirements can be met. So that's the first category. The second category is that institutions their Bureau laws and regulations that speak to institutions' ability to quantify the cost of the total of the educational program. And that's for purposes of when a student cancels or withdraws their enrollment, there must be a refund that the institution provides. When a school closes or is in default of the enrollment agreement before completion of the educational program, again, the school has to provide a refund. And then relatedly with the STRIF calculations and reporting, there must be an understanding of what the total cost of tuition is, because that's what the economic loss is calculated on in order to provide to the students. So where it's difficult to quantify the total cost of the educational program because it's contingent on future income, then you have those regulations and laws that may not be able to be met. So, any questions?
I have a question, because of course I do. Okay, so just for the sake of argument, you have an enrollment agreement, okay, and it's a $10,000 program. And you're a student who is eligible for federal student aid or is taking out a loan from a bank or whatever the case is. On the enrollment agreement, you are not disclosing all of the terms of that loan and telling a student, the program is $10,000 in tuition, but you're going to take out federal student loans. So in the end, it's going to cost you $16,000 because when you add interest, that's what it looks like. So to me, unless we're going to expect that included in the enrollment agreement is somehow a disclosure to a student of, depending upon the form of financing that you use to pay your tuition, here is how much it may ultimately cost you to finance your education. Because in my view, an ISA is not changing how much the program costs. It's the cost of financing your education depending on what your income ends up being, as opposed to it's a 6% loan or an 8% loan or whatever it is. So if your position is that an ISA, because you're not telling the student up front what the you are, but in a separate document, obviously, not in the enrollment agreement, then wouldn't that same rationale reasoning apply to any form of financing where what the student ultimately pays is not going to be the $10,000 tuition, because it's always going to have some an additional fees and charges and interest and all the things that come along with financing and education? Isn't that also true for any loan?
I think the difference might be that, with financing of traditional loans, there's a percentage cost, and it's based on the amount of originally financed paid over a payment of time. But when with ISAs, it's a percentage, but based on an undetermined future income that is not known. So it's a little bit different. Again, ISAs, there are various models. The Bureau's seen different models, and so it has to look at each on a case-by-case basis. The enrollment agreement, the catalog, does it list the total cost of the education? I understand what you're saying, but I think there's a distinction there because of the fact that the financing is really dependent on an unknown about the future job that the student gets and how much that job is. Whereas a traditional loan, you have a set amount of money that you are financing, and then the interest rate on top of that.
And that also assumes that the student continues to pay on so if you have a 10-year loan, that you don't forbear or defer, or, so there's to me, you can never say up front exactly what the amount's going to be, because you don't know what the student's, long-term condition is going to be or how things are going to work out. I understand what you're saying, but I think the counter to that is, if you're and you're right, there are different forms of this. So the ones that I've worked with most frequently are, or the disclosure to the student is very similar to a TILA disclosure, where it lays out, depending on how much you make, this is how much you're going to pay, this is the cap on how much you're going to pay based on your tuition. And so a student knows upfront in a similar fashion to when they're signing any other TILA disclosure, that the minimum I might pay is $0. The maximum I might pay is 2x my tuition over the course of 3, 4, 5, whatever the year term is. So, and I understand that I don't want to put you on the spot. Maybe this is a future discussion, but so if you're an institution that wants to use this as a financing model, the idea. Would the concept from the Bureau standpoint be that you would need to include in the enrollment agreement language about how, if you were to choose to do an ISA, this is how much it might cost, so that you're disclosing it to the student up front?
Yeah, I wouldn't be prepared to tell you that right now, but yeah. So this is just I'm just wanted to point out it's a case-by-case basis on each enrollment agreement and how it's laid out, but this is what is required under the current laws and statutes. So I would I would have to speak with Dr. Marian and see what his position would be on that particular case.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be useful, and so maybe we can have that on the next agenda to discuss, based on, sort of the general idea behind an ISA, what would you expect it to include, and how would a school use it in a way that would comply? I think that would be a helpful discussion. Okay.
My only concern is we really can't give advice to schools about how they could comply and formulate their agreement. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if Ms. Hamilton can do that.
No, I don't mean.
That's my concern is
I don't
that
mean
she
the
would be able to tell them
ISA
how to
itself.
draft their agreements.
No, I don't mean the ISA. I mean, what would you need to see in the enrollment agreement? And you clearly have the ability to do that because the enrollment agreement is very prescribed. Not proscribed, prescribed. Like what is included in an enrollment agreement is part of the statute. So if there was some part of an ISA that you think should be included in the enrollment agreement under those, that's what I think would be valuable to schools. Not what their ISA looks like, because I think that's a completely different question.
Well, yeah, and I think it's, what I pointed out was that it's total charges, and, we've seen them where they do not include that. They don't
Okay.
have total charges, so.
Okay.
That's the requirement, and total charges is specifically defined in the law. So it would have to comply with all the charges that a student is going to be required to pay to the school and to any other person as a condition to enroll in the program.
Yeah, so I think that this is really helpful. I think that for what I've gathered is that there's a very big difference in terms of how speculative the charges are that you're being charged at the beginning when you're enrolling in the institution. And I think that students do use that information to shop around, and I just don't see how students can do that when there's an agreement to pay a portion of an unknown income in the future. They're able to do that when the institution says this is the cost of the education. You might get your own financing, you might from the federal government or private student loans, which might have their own contracts. But if you paid cash up front, this is how much it would cost. And they can compare that cost with different institutions. But if there's a school that has this ISA financing, it's so speculative that I think is just, it creates a problem for students in terms of being able to compare. And, that's the purpose of having like TILA disclosures is so that you are able to compare the cost of financing. And I just, I feel like the current laws were set up for schools charging money in a certain way, and for students to be able to compare and make informed decisions about how much they're going to pay for institutions. And I don't, it seems to me that the current laws maybe they didn't foresee this kind of financing, and I think that students may not be protected enough if these kinds of financing is allowed to happen.
I disagree, but of course. Taking your example, so I'm a student and I'm shopping. I go to your school and I have an enrollment agreement. It says the total tuition for this program is $10,000. Unless I go through the process with that school to determine how I'm going to finance my education, it's $10,000 as far as I know, right? So I don't know at that point when I'm shopping, unless I've gone through that school's financial aid process, to know how much it will cost if I take out a federal loan, how much will it cost if I do an institutional loan, how much will it cost if I do a private loan with a bank. A student never knows that based on the enrollment agreement, because that information is not included on an enrollment agreement. It is something that's disclosed to the student during the financial aid process. So obviously, and in most cases, and I will say from my understanding, most schools have more than one option. It's not like this is the only option you have. So if you're a student and you're enrolling and you're like, okay, the tuition's 10 grand, how am I going to pay for that? And then they meet with the financial aid office and they say, you could do this, that, or the other. Here's what these things look like. The ISAs that I've worked with, at least, have been very clear on they will include a chart for how the minimum amount you have to be making to even have to pay it all, how many years, what's the percentage depending on how much you earn. It has a dollar. I mean, like, it is very detailed. So if you're a student and you're like, okay, well, I have the option of taking out a student loan with the feds, and here's my TILA disclosure that says at 8% it's this. It's going to be $15,000, or I take the ISA where I could literally pay nothing, or the max is that I'm going to pay $20,000. Well, the student has all that information and they can make an informed choice about whether or not they're willing to take the risk. And so, to me, I guess for me, I don't see that there's a difference in a student's ability to shop around, because they are not going to know based on the EA alone what it's going to cost them to finance. Because there's always unless they pay cash, and if they pay cash, then it's whatever it says it is, right? So financing costs money regardless of how you do it.
Yeah, that's true. Financing costs money, but the difference in like interest rates you might get from a bank or the federal government is within like a single digit margin versus, with the ISAs, you could be paying zero, you could be paying, 2x your tuition. That's a much bigger margin. And I don't know that students like 18, like 20 years old really, I think that you can make comparisons based on principal and interest, but then when you're adding these like different ranges and the speculation about whether or not you'll get a job that pays a certain amount of money, that's introducing a lot of risk calculation that I don't I think that's very hard. That's a very hard responsibility to put on an individual who's shopping around for these schools.
I have a question. How do you deal with disclosure of the total of payments and the interest, the annual percentage rate under TILA?
So what I've seen is on the first page of the ISA agreement, there will be a chart that will say, it'll have like an earnings column, and you'll agree up front with the percentages, so maybe it's 15% or 10% or 8% of earnings. Yeah. Right, there's no interest rate. It's just a percentage of earnings. So it'll actually show you if you're making $50,000, your percentage is 0 because maybe 50 is the minimum, and a lot of them that's what it is, 50 or 60. So then you make 60,000. If you make 60,000 at 15%, you're going to make this much of a payment on a monthly basis. Oh, and for 3 years, that total is X. And if you're making this much at this percentage of your income so you can actually see in the chart. If I'm making 60,000, I'm going to pay this much per month. If I'm making 80,000, I make this much per month. And the total number of years it's a 3-year term, and it caps out at some dollar amount. So if the dollar amount is 2x tuition, the max you're ever going to pay is 50,000. So it's very detailed. So a student can really see up front what you're signing on for, and they can compare that against, whatever.
Well, I guess my question is, if there's no disclosure of the interest rate and the disclosure is the percentage of income, how do you compare that with a federal student loan or a private bank loan? Because the whole point of TILA is you have something that is defined, the annual percentage rate, and you can look at that for 3 different loans and you can say, this one is the better deal. With this one, I don't see how students would be able to do that, assuming they were sophisticated enough to do it. And also, if it's showing a percentage of income, a percentage of income might sound fairly low. Gee, only 10% of what I earn. But if you figured out what the annual percentage rate would be, it might be a very expensive loan. So I guess I don't see how you can comply with TILA in addition to the issues that Megumi raised about, students' capability to, I think this, even just figuring out how much the loan is going to cost them is very difficult for people.
Well, I think that like on a TILA disclosure, right, the final box on the first page is always the total amount, including the cost of the credit, right? So that with the interest rate amortized,
this is just a very technical point. I
Right.
don't see how you can comply with TILA when you don't have an interest rate, because that's one of the annual percentage rate. That's one of the required disclosures. So I
Right.
think regardless of everything else you look at, that sort of knocks it out.
Well, they're not subject to TILA.
Well, under California law, they are. It's incorporated in California law.
Income share agreements?
Under the Bureau. Your disclosures.
Just clarify, it says in making consumer loans to students, an institution shall also comply with the requirements of the Federal Truth in Lending Act. So California has determined that if there's a consumer loan, you have to comply with TILA.
Right, but at this point, income share agreements are not defined as consumer loans.
Well, that's your interpretation.
I think you'd have I think that's it. Well,
It'd be hard to argue that it's not a debt of some kind or credit.
Right. No, I agree, but
in a term of more than 4 payments over a period of time.
Right, yeah.
I don't know.
On the federal side, we're probably going to see some sort of repayment rate in the next Higher Education Act, similar to this. But it seems like it's a pretty specific issue. I don't know, can't you just tell them it's the maximum price, and if you can't pay it off with this formula, the rest of the loan is forgiven? That way you've figured it out. Otherwise...
Yeah, I think from a comparison shopping standpoint, that is what you need to do. The student would need to see the max I would end up potentially paying is X, as compared to the TILA disclosure says I'll pay $16,000 on this $10,000 loan. The ISA says I'll pay $22,000 max on this loan. So which one do I want to do?
The student is hoping he's paying the max. That means he's making bank. So if it doesn't work out, he's paying much less.
I have a couple of quick thoughts. First, I think the root issue is Megumi addressed earlier, which is the standard deviation in student experience. So grad A and grad B can have vastly different financial profiles, which is unknowable at the time of enrollment. The second question or concern that I would have from the institutional perspective is related to misrepresentation. And it's already very complicated to communicate with prospective students what the cost of education is. And there are very specific guidelines, right, around implying or misleading. And the most difficult part of misrepresentation regs is not so much what you said as to what they heard. And so students who, particularly a high-earning student who is, after the fact, thought it was a great idea when they signed, are going to be highly likely to complain at some later date, right, and add to our queue of student complaints that says, hey, I never thought I was going to be paying that much. And if we're referring back to a complicated ISA agreement that they didn't understand when they signed it, I'd be concerned that the school would get dragged into an issue of saying, well, my admissions advisor told me that I probably wouldn't pay anything because not very many people make that amount of money, right? And so it just seems really, really fuzzy and highly variable. And I understand that that's how the design works, right? And interestingly, I think if you're as a side note, if you're ideologically aligned with a highly progressive tax system, then this is that, right? Like people that don't earn very much don't pay anything. People that earn a lot pay a lot more. So it's fascinating to see sort of schisms and divides internally, right? Particularly on points of view, right? But I would be worried about misrepresentation, and I think the standard deviation makes it hard to compare.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I don't know that a student would want the max because then they'd feel like they were making bank. I think it would lead to the situation where they come back and be like, whoa, I didn't realize it was going to be that much. Not like I'm making a lot of money, so it's fine. And so I do think you have this issue of what it actually says, which versus what students will think it said, or what's being communicated to them about what it means and how it will play out.
I think also you've got another potential problem because, Kate, if it isn't a loan, then it's a part of the total cost of the course. You know what I mean? It's either the total cost of the course, which has to be disclosed, or it's a loan, which has to be disclosed that way. So if it's not a loan, then you're putting yourself back into it has to be disclosed totally on the contract because that's part of the cost of the education.
But if it's being disclosed to the student in the agreement itself, just as if we were signing a TILA disclosure or a loan agreement.
But it's not just as if it's TILA because the way I understand it, you can't make all the required disclosures under TILA. So I think it's got some real problems technically, legally, besides all the practical points that I think that everybody else has been making.
Well, I will just put this on the record as someone who represents schools that cover all different kinds of payment plans. That to me, this is very much it's a risk sharing plan, right? Because you could be the student that goes through and makes bank, or you could be the student that goes through and ends up unemployed. In any case, it's an incentive for the school to make sure that you get a good education and get a job because they want to get paid. So I think this is something that is going to be. We're already starting to see it a lot more of it in traditional education. A lot of traditional, sort of nonprofit big universities are starting to do this. So we really do need to think about how we can stay aligned with this, because just saying, that this just doesn't work is taking, this option off the table that is now becoming much more prevalent. So I think we need to have further conversation about how do we make this work? Because I think this is the future of how there's going to be risk share between universities and students on how they pay if they're not eligible for student loans, or they're attending a school that doesn't have them. Whatever the case is, there has to be some other methodology, and so I think we just need to talk more about how that this can be approached. And I think that the types of disclosures that I'm seeing from companies that offer ISAs are even more detailed than a TILA disclosure. Obviously, you're right. They can't disclose an interest rate because there isn't one. It's a percentage of earnings, but they're giving the student really very detailed information about all the different ways and what the max they will ever pay is, which to me is essentially what the final box of a TILA disclosure is. Like the total you'll pay is $17,000. With an ISA, the disclosure is going to say the total you'll ever pay is 2x your tuition at whatever that is. So to me, I think students are still getting the opportunity to compare, but I agree that there's there's question about how it fits in to, what we have now, because obviously when this law was enacted, this was not a thing. So I just want to make sure that we're keeping an open mind, because I do think it's going to become more of a thing, not less of a thing.
I agree with you, and I think there was a comment before that the Fed borrowing rate versus a bank borrowing rate. We got to think bank borrowing rate is on a credit card, so there's a big difference. It's probably 12 percentage point difference.
I just sort of wanted to say that I mean, if this is something that is students in certain kinds of programs may be advocating for, I think that there could be an avenue for it, but I don't think that it's trying to shove it within the current regulation, which the current regulation that's meant to protect students didn't envision this and doesn't protect students, I think, sufficiently for this kind of thing. And so I think if this is going to be a financing structure that's considered in the future, that there needs to be new legislation for it.
I would also think that we don't know very much about how in practice they work. And I think it would be helpful to see for a while, if they're being used in other sectors, how they actually pan out. Now, it doesn't mean they'll pan out the same way in the private school sector as they do in the public school setting. But we don't know how that is really going to work, and whether that is really going to harm students or help students, or it helps 50% and it harms 50% or whatever. So I think it's kind of thing where we shouldn't, even thinking about new legislation, I don't think we should be leaping in until we know a lot more about how it really is working out in practice in other situations.
And because it's so new, I think you're right. We don't. How many schools? The schools that I know of that are using them are probably only maybe in the second year of using them, and so most of them probably aren't even in repayment yet. So yeah.
And they may be the more responsible schools too. So, when if you roll that out so that anybody can do it, you're asking for trouble unless we've really been able to look at the data and think it through, I think.
And the other thing too to keep in mind from the school's perspective is they are taking a huge risk because they're not getting funded up front like they are with Title IV money. So when it's all deferred, so if you're the school and you're using these as a primary form of funding, you're not getting any money until the student graduates and gets a job. So that is, from a responsibility standpoint, they're taking a big risk.
Which also makes me wonder about schools doing that, because especially I don't know about the public sector, but in the private sector, if their students can qualify for student loans, why would they do it this way? And I can think of a couple of reasons. One is they're charging astronomical sums, so the student, financial programs won't pay for it. Or two, they don't think they can stay. They are out of the student loan program at the federal level, or they think they will be because of problems with 90/10 or whatever, some other program. I mean, I can think of some really bad reasons why schools in the private sector might want to go into this when there's an obvious, easy thing for students to do where they already have. I mean, we talked about when they were presenting it, under the federal program, you have specific rights. If the school closes, if the school defrauds you, all of these different things. And why? I mean, I don't think a student is going to understand, hey, I'm not going to have those rights if I do it this other way. And the schools that might be interested in this other way, that could be the really bad ones, the ones that figure, fine, I'll have a run of 10 years and then the lender won't do it anymore. Or, there's all kinds of things. So it's just something we really need to think carefully about before we go forward with anything.
I just wanted to say, I think I read that there is federal legislation that either had been proposed or is going to be proposed. So it might be addressed on a federal level as well.
Yeah, there was some discussion about it last year. And I think all the things everyone's saying right now are completely, they're all the same questions I think everybody has. And I think the feds are seeing more and more of these and will end up jumping in. I think that's inevitable. But well, thank you, Mina, for putting this together. Yeah, agreed. Does anybody want a public comment about the income share agreements. Mr. Kadani approaches the bench. Oh, I like that.
It is afternoon, right. Good afternoon, everybody. Awad Kadani, representing VMO Education, which is a leader in the implementation of said product that we're talking about today. I want to first, commend council for a thorough dive into a very new area that we see here from and it leads me to establish a premise here. What are we talking about? This is simply a tool. This is consistent with Obama's policy, which was allowing schools to invest, in their students if they truly believe in what they're selling. Put your money where your mouth is. I want to reiterate what Madam Chair said, ladies and gentlemen, which is the schools are taking on a tremendous amount of risk. And if a school chooses by their own business, plan to solely do this, or their business model is all income sharing agreements, which I would not advise, then that is on them. What we completely agree with, just like with loans, student loans, or credit cards, or borrowing money from mom and dad, there should be controls and disclosures associated with any type of financial transaction. I want to be very clear, speaking on behalf of VMO, which truly believes in a very, very well disclosed, transparent, system. A healthy system like this benefits the consumers because it gives the consumers an additional tool. Maybe income sharing agreements is not a good idea. Maybe, as my kids have often done, they dig into my pockets and they get their education free. Perhaps another kid says, you know what? I think I'll probably be making $50,000, $60,000. But if I don't, I know the school is going to be on the hook for not living up to that promise. So all I'm submitting to this body is my client, myself, my CEO, who recently came up here and briefed this body. We stand committed to addressing all of those well-memorialized concerns, because we have those concerns, which we're addressing internally, and we look forward to continue to working with all of you on this issue. With that, I thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
Well,
can she ask your question?
Right? I'm not asking.
I don't know.
Just like old times.
I just want a point of information. When you indicated that Obama had made a statement, I assume that was not in reference to these types of programs, right?
No, the programs is consistent with how he believes with performance measures.
You're saying you believe the program is consistent with what he has said?
That's correct.
All right.
Thank you for that clarification.
I think we need to be careful that we're not denying people opportunities just because we're too worried that somebody might abuse this or somebody may not understand it. If you have enough controls in place, enough disclosures in place, you're creating more opportunity for people than anything else. And not all schools choose to be Title IV. There's a lot of overhead and a lot of costs involved with that, and schools can decide, I'd rather put the money in the classroom versus the admin side.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions for Mr. Gadani? All right, thank you. Any other public comment? The return of Mr. Johnson?
This is not a paid political announcement. Our membership is interested in this. I would say that there has been a discussion on this model. One thing I would point out, the consumer advocates were very, very interested in making sure, in terms of disclosures, that students had an expectation when they signed it up with a school in our sector about what they would make. In the information fact sheet that every student is provided, both in before they sign the enrollment, as part of their enrollment, they're given a labor market survey in terms of what they could expect to earn. So the state of California has essentially addressed the issue of if you're going to be an HVAC or a welder or a med tech or an EMT, what your expectations are in terms of wage gains. So that's laid out in the law, it's current law. And it goes to the issue of essentially, are we leading people into false expectations that they're going to make, $100,000 a year as a medical assistant? No. Here's what you're going to make. So the compliance reviews that the Bureau provides, the school's responsibility to put that information together, it's all in the system working right now. The other thing that I think, if you take a look at the literature that's out there right now, and you'll find that the leading educational publications are starting to talk about these funding mechanisms more and more. I believe either Harvard or Yale just purchased a coding school, which they will essentially fund with these agreements. So the other interesting component is Purdue University has just designated a number of their occupational programs as eligible for these agreements as well. So I think you're starting to see more and more universities, both public and private, starting to taking a look at these agreements. And I think the comment was made, and I think that was a really correct comment, is that it's not just the sole mechanism offered. It is a range of funding that is available to the student to take a look at. And so within that context, I hope that by the time the Sunset Review rolls around, that there will have been a in-depth discussion about how these kinds of funding agreements can be employed with the adequate safeguards that will allow people who represent students to feel comfortable with that kind of funding. And I'll just close on this. I mean, it's ironic to me where our chief critics, first thing they complain about is the poor quality of the schools, how nobody gets a job, how basically they're not getting paid and they're dropping out. What would be a more perfect funding mechanism than one of these agreements? Because if they really believe that, then their education for those students are free. So just think about that for a little bit. But I would just close on this. I said, I think clearly there's legitimate concerns. People ought to take a look at that. I think it's 2020 coming up. So I think we need to be prepared for the future. And I think an active discussion early with both the legislature as well as administratively would be helpful for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay, just a quick question. I know that I have actually spoken on ISAs in comments before, and really just going to repeat what I've said before, which is that today there were a lot of, I think, reasonable concerns raised about this issue, and a lot of some of the concerns that TICAS shares raised during the discussion today. Largely, the way that these financing instruments are used, their speculative nature, and really their interaction with other existing financing tools, especially federal financial loans, et cetera. We at TICAS track this issue, and as I say, are more than happy to be a resource. And so as this discussion continues, if there are ways that we can be helpful, I want to volunteer to be helpful in any way I can. So that's really it. And thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Whew, good. Okay. This is the most heated debate we've ever had at this meeting. Yeah, it really wasn't. No one yelled at anyone. No one called anyone names, so it's all good. Okay, so that concludes item 7, which leads us to future agenda items. I already have on my list, David, this discussion of options for STRIF, sort of application to different things that would maybe help keep a school alive or / file maintenance. I'm adding ISAs to the list, just in case there's more that we can discuss the next meeting once we've had a chance to digest. Did anyone else have other?
I don't know if we need to add something to discuss the complaints that we'll be receiving through the mail, but I'd like to have a discussion about what we received through the mail. And I'd also like to talk about, if there's any way that we can sort of make some of the, have a public way have a way for complaints to be made public. Because I feel like, what I've heard from a lot of students who have had complaints about schools, reasons why they've been deterred from making complaints is I think that they feel a lot of personal responsibility, and if they had heard that someone else went through the same thing and that they realized that other people found it unfair, didn't realize it was unlawful, that they're more willing to come forward. So I'm wondering if, the other institutions do this, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where they allow a public space for people to make complaints about products. And I'm wondering if we can have a discussion about that and complaints that students make.
Is there some part of the complaint that's public, right? When it's on the website, isn't there or is that only if it ends up being a citations issued, or? Okay.
Yeah, correct. It's considered an exemption under the Public Records Act.
Okay.
And so that's for pending complaints and closed complaints.
Okay.
Unless there's been a waiver of the complaint and it's previously been made public.
Okay.
But I think what she's talking about is having a mechanism where it's viewable when there are complaints about a school. So, yes.
This might be an item for the future agenda topic, so I would just suggest we not go any farther on that item. I did suggest putting the OSAR duty analysis on the future agenda. And then you had mentioned something about discussion of scenarios or triggers for enforcement. We had mentioned on the lead agency item, so I don't know if you want to consider that as well.
I can't remember what that one was. Was that one of yours, Margaret?
I think so, and he laughs. I think that what I was really asking for was maybe in the reporting mechanism, if we could get some analysis of some of the schools that have either been prosecuted or sued or closed, that would have like a timeline showing, here's the date they closed, here's the date that they were given an OSC by the accredited agency, here's the date we did an unannounced inspection, here's the date that, we reviewed their federal financial data and found this, or, whatever triggers. I'd like to know what are some examples.
Like a process timeline analysis.
Yeah, of, what are the triggers that we're getting? And if we're not getting enough, are there things that we should think about that maybe we need to seek a change in legislation, or maybe it's something we can do by regulation? But I think that's what I was suggesting. And I guess if we have a report on it, sure, why not have a discussion then? But it might make sense to have the report and then the discussion the following meeting. But if we have the data, not be a bad idea to have the discussion next meeting.
I'm not certain what the cadence is for financial reports. Will we already receive an update on revenue and expenditures in our next meeting?
I was going to say things like, did the feds provide us their information on the finance report? Did the school provide that?
No, I'm sorry.
You're adding another
period,
issue,
new paragraph. Yeah, another issue. Yeah, going to fee. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just to another budget update?
Correct. Yeah, specifically in regards to the fee structure, the increase in fees, revenue, tracking against expenses. Yeah.
And just to add to that, in light of the anticipated upcoming expenses for the IT, and compared to what additional staffing might be required to try to get the inspections up to date. So the whole gamut.
Yeah, I think if I recall correctly, that the last time we had a budget update, I asked the question about how the IT system was incorporated into what was provided, and it wasn't. So it would be helpful to have a sense of partly what Joseph's talking about, which is with the increased fees, what are we seeing year over year? And then also, how is the IT project fit into the budget?
And then if we can just get a staffing update, because I know there's still some vacancies, and if you reorg again, if we can get an update on that, and then an update on the special task force for the backlog, if that can make sure that is excluded.
Yeah, and imagine that would be part of the. Plan for a full day. We always say that, but here we are, and it's 1:53.
Would you put a lunch break on the agenda?
No eating. It's always the toss-up of like, do you take the break and be here longer, or do you just power through? Okay, so before we adjourn, I just want to say thank you to Tamika again. We'll miss you. Congratulations on the baby. Yeah. Who, by the way, is the cutest thing ever. It's been great having you, and we're sorry to see you go, but thank you for your service. And with that, unless anyone else has anything else, I think we can adjourn. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.